Imagine a porcelain doll, perfectly painted smile, glassy eyes, never blinking. It sits on a shelf, motionless, serene in its stillness. From a distance, it appears peaceful, even beautiful. But look closer. There is no breath behind those eyes. No pulse beneath the painted lips. It is not calm. It is empty. And yet, how many of us live like that doll, polished, composed, smiling on cue, while inside, something vital has gone still? This is the quiet tragedy of emotional masking, the act of concealing your true emotional state beneath a carefully maintained surface of calm, cheerfulness, or indifference. It is not mere politeness. It is not simply being well-mannered. It is a survival mechanism, refined over years, sometimes decades, until the mask becomes indistinguishable from the face beneath. And the deeper we wear it, the more we forget who we are when the performance ends. Emotional masking is not a single act, but a pattern, a reflex so ingrained that it operates beneath awareness. It happens when you receive devastating news and respond with a nod and a quiet "I'm fine." It happens when you're overwhelmed with grief but laugh at a coworker's joke to keep the mood light. It happens when you're furious, trembling with unspoken words, yet smile and say, "No, really, it's okay." This suppression is not always conscious. Often, it begins in childhood, in homes where emotions were met with dismissal, punishment, or silence. A child learns quickly, sadness is weakness, anger is dangerous, fear is shameful. So they learn to fold their feelings inward, to swallow them like stones, and present a version of themselves that is palatable, acceptable, safe. Over time, this becomes second nature. The nervous system adapts. The body forgets how to tremble, how to cry, how to rage. The mind forgets how to name what it feels. Psychologists call this alexithymia, the inability to identify and describe emotions. It is not a flaw. It is a wound disguised as resilience. Consider the lives shaped by this invisible labor. The caregiver who soothes others through crisis after crisis, yet collapses in silence once the door closes. The executive who commands boardrooms with unshakable confidence, while privately drowning in anxiety. The child raised in a home of quiet tension, who learned to monitor the emotional weather of their parents, adjusting their behavior to prevent storms. These are not isolated cases. Emotional masking thrives in cultures that glorify stoicism, in workplaces that reward relentless productivity, in families where vulnerability is seen as betrayal. It is the currency of survival in environments where authenticity is too risky. And so, we become experts in performance, our faces trained into neutral expressions, our voices modulated to avoid intensity, our bodies held rigid to prevent any telltale tremor of truth. But the cost is steep, and it accumulates in silence. The more we hide our pain, the more we disconnect from ourselves. Emotions are not just feelings, they are signals. They tell us when we are unsafe, when we are unloved, when we are exhausted. When we suppress them, we silence the inner compass. Over time, masked individuals may no longer recognize their own emotional landscape. They can't distinguish sadness from fatigue, anger from anxiety. They may not even realize they are suffering until their body breaks, through insomnia, chronic pain, or sudden emotional collapse. This is the paradox of emotional masking, the very act meant to protect us from judgment, rejection, or chaos ends up isolating us from our own souls. We become strangers to ourselves, living behind a veil of composure, wondering why, despite appearing fine, we feel so hollow. And then comes the moment, often in solitude, in the dark hours before sleep, when the mask slips. Not dramatically, but quietly. A tear falls without warning. A wave of grief rises from nowhere. A voice inside whispers, "Who am I when no one's watching?" That question is the first crack in the facade. It is also the beginning of awakening. Because identity is not performance. It is presence. It is the ability to feel, to name, to be witnessed. When we spend a lifetime editing ourselves for others, we lose the thread of authenticity. We forget that we are allowed to be messy, contradictory, incomplete. We forget that to be human is not to be strong, but to be real. This red flag is not rare. It is everywhere. We see it in the friend who always says "I'm good," even as their hands shake. In the partner who avoids conflict at all costs. In the parent who puts everyone else first, until there is nothing left. We praise these people. We call them strong, reliable, selfless. But strength is not the absence of struggle. It is the courage to face it. And what we often mistake for strength is actually exhaustion wearing a smile. The tragedy is not that people mask their emotions. The tragedy is that we have built a world where they feel they must. And so, as you listen to these words, perhaps you feel a quiet recognition. Maybe you see yourself in the porcelain doll, the one who looks serene, but inside, nothing moves. And that's okay. Awareness is not an accusation. It is an invitation. An invitation to pause. To breathe. To ask, without judgment, what am I hiding? And from whom? You do not have to tear off the mask tonight. You do not have to scream or collapse or rewrite your life. You only need to notice. To allow the smallest space where you can say, even in silence, "I am not fine." And that's okay. Because healing does not begin with grand revelations. It begins with a whisper. With a single breath that is not performed, but lived. And as we prepare to move forward, to drift deeper into the mind's hidden corridors, consider this: if we have spent so long hiding our pain behind a smile, what happens when we begin to crave the very chaos that taught us to hide? What if, beneath the need for peace, there is a buried longing for the storm? Let us now turn gently toward that unsettling pull, the mind that secretly longs for turbulence, for the familiar ache of crisis. Let us enter, with quiet curiosity, the red flag of craving chaos. There is a peculiar kind of exhaustion that comes not from overwork, but from peace. A stillness so deep it feels like falling. You're in a safe relationship, no yelling, no games, no silent treatments, yet your chest tightens. You begin to pick at small things, magnify misunderstandings, wait for the other shoe to drop. Or perhaps you're in a stable job, with predictable hours and steady pay, but a quiet restlessness hums beneath your skin, whispering that something is missing. You start longing for the old toxicity, the old drama, the adrenaline of crisis. This isn't a sign of ingratitude. It's a red flag, the unconscious craving for chaos. Not because chaos is good, but because it is known. Not because it brings joy, but because it brings sensation. And when sensation is the only proof you have that you're alive, even pain becomes preferable to numbness. Chaos, in the psychological sense, is not merely disorder. It is unpredictability. It is emotional volatility. It is the constant hum of tension beneath the surface of daily life, the kind where love arrives with conditions, where affection is withdrawn without warning, where safety is temporary and earned through performance. For those raised in such environments, the nervous system doesn't just adapt to chaos, it becomes dependent on it. The brain learns to equate intensity with presence. When every interaction carries emotional weight, when every silence could mean danger, the mind stays in a state of hypervigilance. This is not pathology. It is survival. But over time, the body forgets how to rest. Calmness doesn't feel like relief. It feels like absence. Like being forgotten. Like fading out of existence. Imagine a child who only received attention when there was a crisis. When they were sick, their parent rushed to their side. When they cried, they were finally seen. But when they were quiet, content, playing alone, nothing. No praise, no touch, no acknowledgement. Over time, the subconscious learns a devastating lesson. I am noticed when I am in distress. Pain becomes the pathway to connection. And so, as an adult, the mind may unconsciously recreate that dynamic, not because it wants to suffer, but because it wants to be seen. The argument that erupts out of nowhere. The relationship that cycles between obsession and withdrawal. The job that keeps you on edge, where praise is rare but criticism is frequent. These are not random misfortunes. They are echoes. They are the psyche reaching for what it knows, mistaking familiarity for safety. This pattern is deeply rooted in attachment theory, particularly in anxious and disorganized attachment styles. Anxiously attached individuals often fear abandonment and seek closeness through heightened emotional engagement, even if that engagement is negative. Disorganized attachment, often born from trauma or inconsistent caregiving, creates a push-pull dynamic, a longing for intimacy warring with the terror of it. In both cases, stability feels unnerving. A partner who is consistently kind, present, and reliable can feel boring or emotionally distant, not because they are, but because their steadiness doesn't trigger the nervous system's alert system. Without the familiar spikes of anxiety, jealousy, or conflict, the mind begins to wonder, am I even here? The absence of drama starts to feel like erasure. And so, the individual may unconsciously provoke chaos. They might misinterpret neutral comments as slights. They might withdraw affection to test loyalty. They might choose partners who are emotionally unavailable, volatile, or unpredictable, not because they enjoy the pain, but because those traits mirror the emotional landscape of their earliest relationships. The brain is not seeking happiness. It is seeking confirmation. It is asking, over and over, do you see me? Will you stay? Are you real? And when the answer comes in the form of a fight, a plea, a moment of desperate reconciliation, the nervous system sighs in relief. Not because it's healthy, but because it's familiar. The fire is warm, even as it burns. The deeper tragedy of this red flag is that it masquerades as passion. We romanticize intensity. We confuse jealousy with devotion, obsession with love, turbulence with depth. We tell ourselves that a relationship without drama is flat, that a life without crisis is uninspired. But real intimacy does not require suffering. True connection does not depend on volatility. And yet, for those wired to crave chaos, peace can feel like abandonment. The quiet moments, sitting together in comfortable silence, sharing a meal without tension, planning a future without fear, these are not celebrated. They are distrusted. They are interrupted, sabotaged, or fled from, not out of malice, but out of a silent, aching belief, if it's this easy, it can't be real. This creates a self-perpetuating loop. The more you crave chaos to feel alive, the more you push away the very stability that could help you heal. The partner who offers consistency is labeled boring. The job that provides peace is abandoned for one that reignites the adrenaline. The therapy that brings clarity is dismissed because it doesn't make you cry. And so, the cycle continues, returning to what hurts, avoiding what helps, mistaking the symptoms of trauma for the substance of love. But here lies the mind-bending truth: the craving for chaos is not a flaw. It is a signal. It is the psyche's way of saying, I remember. I survived. And I am still trying to make sense of it. Healing does not begin by condemning this pattern, but by understanding it. By asking, with gentleness, what did chaos once protect me from? What did it once give me? Because beneath the drama, beneath the fights and the tears and the restless nights, there is a quiet plea. Notice me. Stay with me. Don't disappear. And as we sit with this awareness, another question arises, one that will guide us into the next layer of the mind. If chaos feels like proof of existence, what happens when peace finally arrives? What if, after years of turmoil, you find yourself in a moment of true safety, and instead of relief, you feel guilt? What if, deep down, you believe you don't deserve to be happy? Let us now turn gently toward that quiet, insidious whisper, the red flag of feeling undeserving of happiness. There is a moment, fleeting and fragile, when the weight lifts. The sun breaks through the clouds. A laugh escapes without effort. For the first time in weeks, or months, or years, there is no looming deadline, no unresolved argument, no gnawing anxiety. You are simply here, and it feels good. And then, like a cold hand brushing the back of your neck, it comes, a whisper, quiet but insistent, asterisk you don't deserve this, asterisk not loud enough to startle, but deep enough to stain. The warmth of the sun suddenly feels excessive. The laughter, inappropriate. The peace, suspicious. In that instant, joy is no longer a gift. It is a debt. And you, in your subconscious accounting, are already overdrawn. This is the red flag, the inability to accept happiness without guilt. Not because you are ungrateful, but because, somewhere along the way, you learn that pleasure is not a right, it is a reward. And rewards must be earned through suffering. This phenomenon, known in psychology as hedonic guilt, is not mere modesty. It is a deep-seated belief that comfort is dangerous, that ease is a betrayal of some unseen contract. It often begins in childhood, in homes where love was conditional, where affection was given not for being, but for doing. You were praised when you succeeded, noticed when you performed, loved when you were useful. In such environments, joy becomes transactional. You learn that happiness is not a state of being, but a prize to be won through effort, endurance, or sacrifice. The message, spoken or unspoken, is clear. You are only worthy when you are proving yourself. Over time, the mind internalizes this logic so completely that even in moments of rest, it searches for the cost. If there is no struggle, then the joy must be fraudulent. If there is no pain, then the peace must be temporary. And so, the subconscious begins to sabotage the very thing it longs for. Religious or cultural narratives often reinforce this belief. The idea that no pain, no gain is not just a gym slogan, it is a moral framework. The virtuous suffer. The righteous endure. The blessed are tested. In many traditions, pleasure is viewed with suspicion, seen as frivolous, indulgent, or even sinful. To enjoy life too fully is to become complacent, to forget the hardships of others, to lose spiritual vigilance. These messages, absorbed over years, shape the emotional landscape. You may never have been told outright that joy is wrong, but you are taught that suffering is noble. And if suffering is noble, then peace must be suspect. Calmness becomes laziness. Rest becomes avoidance. Happiness, in this moral economy, is not a sign of healing, it is a sign of weakness. And so, when good things happen, when you receive praise, when love arrives unearned, when fortune smiles, you don't celebrate. You brace. You wait for the other shoe to drop. Or worse, you bring it down yourself. You cancel plans at the last minute, not because you're busy, but because you feel unworthy of the outing. You pick a fight with a partner who is being kind, disrupting the harmony because it feels unreal. You fall ill at the start of a vacation, as if your body is enforcing a quota of suffering before allowing pleasure. These are not coincidences. They are rituals of restoration, a subconscious effort to rebalance the scales, to return to the emotional equilibrium of struggle. Because in a mind trained to equate worth with hardship, peace feels like cheating. The implications of this red flag are profound, and they ripple through every dimension of life. It warps your relationship with time. The present is never safe. It is always a prelude to loss, a pause before the next storm. You cannot simply be, you are always preparing, recovering, or apologizing. The future is no better. Even when you dream of happiness, you imagine it as something you will earn someday, after enough sacrifice. But someday never comes, because the goalposts move. Once you achieve one milestone, another appears. The finish line is always just out of reach, because the mind cannot allow happiness to be unconditional. Even more insidious is the way this guilt distorts your relationship with others. You may begin to resent those who seem to accept joy effortlessly, those who laugh without hesitation, who rest without guilt, who love without testing. But this resentment is not born of envy. It is born of confusion. Their ease highlights your prison. Their ability to receive kindness without suspicion makes your own resistance feel like a personal failing. And so, you may withdraw, unconsciously punishing them for their freedom, or punishing yourself for not having it. You may even reject their affection, not because you don't want it, but because you believe you don't deserve it. In this way, hedonic guilt becomes a barrier not just to joy, but to connection. And yet, beneath the guilt, there is a quiet yearning. A part of you still remembers what it feels like to be unburdened. To lie in the sun without a single thought. To laugh until your ribs ache. To accept a compliment and simply say, "Thank you," without deflecting or minimizing. That part of you is not broken. It is buried. It has been silenced by years of conditioning, but it is still there, whispering, waiting. Healing begins not with forcing joy, but with noticing the guilt. With sitting in the discomfort of peace and asking, gently, why does this feel wrong? Who taught me that I must suffer to be worthy? There is no need to dismantle the belief in one night. You do not have to leap into celebration. You only need to pause. To breathe. To allow yourself to feel good, even if just for a moment, without demanding payment. To understand that joy is not a luxury earned through pain, but a birthright. That rest is not laziness, but restoration. That you do not have to earn the sun on your skin. And as we drift deeper into this quiet exploration, another question arises, one that trembles just beneath the surface. If joy feels dangerous, what about being seen for who you are? What if, when someone praises you, when they name your strength or your beauty or your brilliance, you feel not pride, but discomfort? What if the idea of being truly recognized makes your skin crawl? Let us now turn gently toward that quiet unease, the red flag of struggling to accept compliments. You've just finished a presentation. The room is quiet, then applause. A colleague approaches, smiling, and says, "That was incredible. You really nailed it." And before you can even feel the warmth of those words, your mouth moves on its own. "Oh, it was nothing," you say, waving a hand. "I just got lucky." Or perhaps you deflect with humor, "Well, at least I didn't faint this time." Or you redirect the praise, "The team did most of the work." The words spill out effortlessly, reflexively, like a well-rehearsed script. But beneath the surface, something shifts. A flicker of discomfort. A tightening in the chest. A voice, faint but certain, whispering, "They don't really mean it." Or worse, they do, and now I'll have to live up to it. This is the red flag, the inability to accept a compliment without diminishing it, deflecting it, or dismantling it entirely. Not because you're humble, but because being seen for your strengths feels, on some deep, instinctual level, like standing too close to a fire. This reflex is not mere modesty. True humility is quiet, grounded, and spacious. It doesn't scramble to reject recognition. But what we often mistake for humility is actually something far more fragile, a defense mechanism forged in environments where attention was dangerous. Imagine growing up in a household where praise was rare, and when it came, it was followed by a sting. You did well, but don't get cocky. That's nice, but your brother got higher marks. Or worse, where attention invited jealousy, criticism, or even punishment. In families with unspoken hierarchies, where one child is favored and another is sidelined, praise can become a landmine. To be seen is to be targeted. To shine is to disrupt the balance. So the mind learns a survival strategy: stay small, downplay, disappear. Over time, this becomes automatic. Even in safe spaces, even from loving people, praise triggers an old alarm: danger. Retreat. For others, the issue runs deeper, rooted in a self-worth that is conditional, tied not to being, but to doing. If your value is always linked to achievement, then a compliment isn't just an observation. It's a benchmark, a test, a promise you now have to keep. You're so talented doesn't feel like kindness, it feels like a contract. Because if you accept it, you must now be talented, forever. You must perform, again and again, to justify the praise. And what if you fail next time? What if you fall short? The compliment, then, isn't a gift, it's a trap. And so, you deflect it, not to be polite, but to protect yourself from the weight of expectation. This is the heart of imposter syndrome, not that you're unqualified, but that you believe you're one misstep away from being exposed as a fraud. And so, you reject the very recognition that might prove you're not. Psychologically, this pattern is tied to a fractured self-concept. You don't reject the compliment because you disbelieve it, you reject the version of yourself it reflects. The person being praised feels like a stranger. That person is capable, worthy, impressive. But you know the doubts, the fears, the moments of weakness no one sees. You remember the times you failed, the hours you procrastinated, the internal voice that whispers not good enough. So when someone praises you, it's not just awkward, it's disorienting. It's like looking in a mirror and seeing someone else. And rather than reconcile the gap, the mind protects itself by denying the image. No, that's not me. You've mistaken me for someone better. The implications of this red flag are subtle but corrosive. Every time you deflect praise, you reinforce an invisible narrative: I am not worthy of being seen. You teach others, gently but consistently, not to look too closely. Not to celebrate you. Not to believe in you, because you don't believe in yourself. And over time, a feedback loop forms. The less you accept recognition, the less others offer it. The quieter you become, the more you recede into the background. You begin to feel invisible, not because people ignore you, but because you've trained them to look away. And the tragedy is that you may not even notice. You tell yourself you prefer it this way, no pressure, no expectations. But beneath the calm is a quiet ache, the longing to be known, to be valued, to be real in the eyes of another. Even more insidious is the way this pattern erodes self-trust. When you constantly dismiss what others affirm, you create a split between external perception and internal reality. Others see your strength, your creativity, your resilience. But you see only the flaws, the gaps, the things left undone. Over time, you stop trusting your own worth. You begin to doubt not just compliments, but your own instincts, your own voice. You wait for external validation, even as you reject it when it arrives. It is a paradox of the wounded self, starving for recognition, yet flinching when it comes. But healing begins in the smallest moments. In the breath between the compliment and the reflex. In the choice, just once, to pause, to let the words land, to say, simply, thank you, without qualification. Not because you suddenly believe them, but because you are practicing a new way of being. You are allowing yourself to be seen, even if it feels unsafe. You are honoring the other person's intention, their courage in offering kindness. And slowly, over time, something shifts. The fire doesn't burn. The spotlight doesn't destroy. Instead, there is warmth. There is connection. There is the quiet possibility that maybe, just maybe, you are allowed to be both flawed and worthy. That you can be imperfect, and still deserving of praise. And as we sit with this growing awareness, another threshold appears, one that trembles with even greater vulnerability. If being praised feels dangerous, what about being loved? What if someone looks at you, sees all your fractures, and says, I love you anyway, not because of what you've done, but simply because you exist? What if love comes with no conditions, no tests, no fine print? Let us now drift into the quiet, trembling fear of unconditional acceptance. Imagine it, someone looks at you, not through the haze of fantasy, not with expectations, not because you've earned it, but simply because you are there, and says, with quiet certainty, I love you. No conditions. No fine print. No hidden demands. Just presence. Just acceptance. And instead of relief, instead of warmth, a cold ripple runs through you. Your breath catches. A knot forms in your chest. You don't pull them closer. You pull away. You pick a fight over something trivial. You withdraw into silence. You test them again and again, waiting for them to fail, to prove that no one could really love you like this. This is the red flag, the fear of unconditional love. Not because you don't want it, but because it feels too vast, too unstable, too unreal. It doesn't fit the script you've lived by for decades. And so, your mind treats it like a threat. For many, love has never been unconditional. It has always been a transaction. I love you if you behave. If you succeed. If you stay quiet. If you don't burden me with your pain. In families where affection was withheld during emotional outbursts, where love was used as a reward or a punishment, the subconscious learns early that connection is earned. You are not loved for existing, you are loved for performing. A child who is praised only when they're good, or comforted only when they stop crying, internalizes a devastating truth: my worth is conditional. Over time, this becomes the emotional blueprint. You come to expect love with strings attached because that is the only kind you've ever known. It is familiar. Predictable. Even if it hurts, you know how to navigate it. You know the rules. You know when the withdrawal will come. But unconditional love breaks the rules. It offers no leverage. No control. No way to earn or lose it. And that, paradoxically, is terrifying. When someone loves you without demands, you lose the ability to manage their affection. You can't behave your way into their heart, because you're already there. You can't fail your way out, because they stay. This lack of control creates a profound disorientation. The mind, trained to survive in a world of emotional scarcity, cannot compute abundance. It searches for the catch, the flaw, the moment when the mask will slip. And when it doesn't, you may begin to manufacture one. You push. You provoke. You create chaos, not because you want to be alone, but because you need to see if they'll leave. You need proof that they're not too good to be true. Because if they're not, then everything you've believed about yourself must be wrong. This fear is rooted in deep attachment wounds. In childhood, if love was inconsistent, if a caregiver was warm one moment and distant the next, if affection came only after suffering or achievement, the nervous system learns to expect instability. It adapts to the rhythm of approach and withdrawal. And so, when faced with steady, unwavering love, the body doesn't relax. It tenses. It waits. It anticipates the fall. Calmness feels like the eye of the storm. Peace feels like the prelude to loss. And so, you sabotage the peace, not out of malice, but out of a desperate need to restore the familiar. You would rather be abandoned for a reason than live in the uncertainty of being loved for no reason at all. The mind-bending truth is this: we often spend our lives longing for unconditional love, dreaming of it in songs, in stories, in quiet midnight thoughts, only to recoil when it finally arrives. We chase it, yearn for it, pray for it, and then, when it knocks on our door, we lock it. We test the person who offers it, not to protect ourselves from them, but to protect ourselves from believing. Because if unconditional love is real, then the story you've told yourself, that you are unworthy, unlovable, too broken to be cherished, must be false. And to dismantle that story is to dismantle the self you've built around it. It is easier, in a strange way, to suffer than to heal. Easier to be lonely than to be seen. Easier to push away love than to face the terrifying possibility that you might deserve it. And so, the cycle continues. The kinder they are, the more suspicious you become. The more patient they are, the more you provoke. The more they stay, the more you wonder when they'll finally see the truth, that you are not as good as they think. That you are hiding flaws, failures, darkness they haven't glimpsed. And in your fear, you may even punish them, not with cruelty, but with distance, with coldness, with silence. You make them earn what they've already given, not because they asked for it, but because you cannot accept a gift you believe you don't deserve. This red flag reveals a quiet, aching belief that love must be difficult to be real. That if it's not painful, it's not deep. That if it doesn't require sacrifice, it's not love at all. But real love is not a trial. It is not a test. It is not something you earn through suffering. It is a presence, a choice, a daily return. And yes, it is rare. But it is not impossible. Healing begins not in demanding love, but in allowing it. In sitting with the discomfort of being cherished without explanation. In resisting the urge to test, to push, to flee. In whispering, even if you don't believe it yet, maybe I don't have to earn this. Maybe I can just receive it. It begins in the smallest act of surrender, letting someone love you, even when you're afraid. And as we rest in this fragile openness, another question arises, one that turns the gaze inward. If unconditional love feels dangerous, what about the way we see ourselves? What if the reflection in the mirror has become not a window to the self, but a mask? What if our obsession with appearance is not vanity, but survival? Let us now turn gently toward the quiet fixation on the surface, the red flag of obsessing over appearance. There is a ritual many of us know well, the slow turn in front of the mirror, eyes scanning, never satisfied. A strand of hair out of place. A shadow under the eyes. A curve that doesn't match the image in your mind. You adjust your posture, shift the light, take a photo, delete it, try again. Hours dissolve into this quiet obsession, choosing the right filter, the perfect angle, the outfit that says I am put together, I am in control, I am acceptable. And yet, when you step away, when the screen goes dark, a hollow feeling remains. Not pride. Not confidence. Just emptiness. The reflection was flawless. But it wasn't you. This is the red flag, not vanity, but an obsession with appearance as emotional armor. A desperate attempt to construct a self that is safe to show the world, because the real one feels too fragile, too exposed, too unworthy of being seen. This fixation on the surface rarely begins in superficiality. It begins in survival. When emotional expression is met with dismissal, punishment, or neglect, the mind learns that the inner world is dangerous territory. To speak your feelings is to risk rejection. To show sadness is to be called weak. To express anger is to be labeled difficult. In such environments, the body becomes the only acceptable language. You learn that what you are is less important than what you look like. A child praised for being cute but ignored when they cry. A teenager complimented on their style while their anxiety goes unnoticed. An adult admired for their fitness while their loneliness deepens in silence. Over time, the message sinks in: your value is visible. Your worth is measurable. Your soul is irrelevant. And so, you begin to invest in the only part of yourself that seems to matter, the exterior. Appearance becomes a fortress. Every curated outfit, every practiced smile, every filtered image is a brick in the wall between you and the world. If I look calm, maybe I won't have to feel anxious. If I appear strong, maybe no one will see how broken I am. If I am beautiful, perhaps I will finally be loved, not for who I am, but for what I represent. This is not narcissism. It is not arrogance. It is a strategy of self-preservation. When emotional intimacy feels like a threat, the body becomes the only identity you can safely offer. You become an expert in presentation, posture, tone, grooming, aesthetics. You master the art of looking fine, so thoroughly that even you start to believe the illusion. But the deeper you invest in the image, the more precarious it becomes. Because the body is not a fixed sculpture. It ages. It changes. It scars, sickens, weakens. And when that happens, the foundation of your identity begins to crack. A wrinkle. A weight shift. An illness. An injury. Suddenly, the mask no longer fits. The armor fails. And beneath it, there is nothing, no practiced persona, no polished surface, just a self that was never allowed to grow from the inside out. This is the tragedy of outsourcing your worth to appearance. It ties your identity to something inherently impermanent. And when time, or fate, or biology disrupts the image, you may not just feel unattractive, you may feel unreal. As if, without the reflection you've spent years perfecting, you cease to exist. This pattern is especially common among those who have experienced objectification, where a person's value was reduced to their physical form. This can happen in abusive relationships, in hypercritical families, in cultures that glorify youth and beauty, or in environments where emotional depth was ignored in favor of surface appeal. When you are treated as a body first and a person second, you internalize that hierarchy. You begin to relate to yourself as an object to be managed, judged, improved. Your thoughts, your dreams, your pain, they all recede, replaced by a relentless focus on how you appear to others. You stop asking, "How do I feel?" and start asking, "How do I look?" And the answer to that question becomes the measure of your entire being. The implications are profound. When your identity is built on appearance, every glance from another person becomes a referendum on your worth. A stranger's stare feels like judgment. A friend's compliment feels like temporary reprieve. Social media becomes a battlefield of comparison, where every like is a lifeline and every ignored post a confirmation of invisibility. You may become hyper-aware of your body and space, how you sit, how you walk, how you eat, because you are always being watched. And even in solitude, the gaze remains. You police yourself. You correct yourself. You erase yourself. The mirror is not a tool. It is a tribunal. But the most insidious cost is the erosion of self-trust. When you've spent years editing your exterior, you lose touch with your interior. You no longer know what you truly like, what you need, who you are beneath the performance. You may not even recognize your own emotions. Joy feels like performance. Grief feels like failure. Desire feels like vanity. You have become a stranger to yourself, living in a body you maintain like a museum exhibit, preserved, polished, and profoundly lonely. Healing does not begin with rejecting appearance, or shaming the obsession. It begins with compassion. With asking, gently, what was I trying to protect? Because behind the mirror, behind the filters, behind the endless adjustments, there is a child who learned that love came through the eyes, not the heart. That safety was found in looking right, not in feeling seen. And that child is still there, waiting. And so, as we soften our gaze, as we allow the image to blur, another question emerges, one that trembles beneath the surface. If the body is a mask, and the emotions are buried, then who are we? What happens when the roles we play, the images we project, the performances we give, all of it begins to dissolve, and we are left with no stable sense of self? Let us now drift into the quiet unraveling of identity diffusion. Close your eyes. Imagine yourself alone in a quiet room. No roles. No expectations. No one watching. No script to follow. Just you. And now ask the simplest question, who am I? And not your job title. Not your relationships. Not the version of you that your mother raised, or your friends admire, or your boss depends on. Strip all of that away. Beneath the layers of performance, habit, and adaptation, what remains? For many, the answer is not clarity, but silence. A hollow space where a self should be. This is the red flag, identity diffusion, the quiet, often invisible erosion of a coherent, stable sense of self. Not confusion. Not indecision. But a fundamental uncertainty about who you are when no one is looking. A life lived in costume, with no memory of the face beneath. Identity diffusion is not a dramatic collapse. It is a slow fading. It begins in environments where being yourself was unsafe. In families where individuality was discouraged, where emotional enmeshment blurred boundaries, where love was conditional on compliance. A child learns quickly, to be seen is to be shaped. To speak your truth is to risk rejection. To have needs is to be selfish. So you adapt. You become what is needed. The peacekeeper. The achiever. The entertainer. The quiet one. You mold yourself to fit the emotional weather of those around you, not out of malice, but out of survival. Over time, this adaptability becomes second nature. You are charming with colleagues, solemn with grieving parents, energetic with friends, passive with partners, each version so convincing that even you begin to believe in them. But beneath the surface, a quiet dissonance grows. You start to wonder, which one of these is real? Or are none of them, This pattern is often linked to chronic emotional invalidation, complex trauma, or developmental environments where the self was never allowed to crystallize. In psychology, it is a hallmark of borderline personality dynamics, not as a diagnosis, but as a lived experience of self-fragmentation. Without a stable core I, the psyche defaults to mirroring. You absorb the moods, values, and desires of others, reflecting them back like light off glass. You don't disagree because you don't know what you believe. You don't make choices because you don't know what you want. You wait for cues. For permission. For someone else to define the shape of your life. And in their absence, you feel not freedom, but emptiness. A kind of psychic weightlessness, as if you might drift apart if you're not anchored to someone else's reality. The existential horror of identity diffusion is not loud. It does not scream. It whispers in the spaces between thoughts. It lives in the pause before answering, "How are you?" It surfaces when you're asked about your favorite book, your political views, your dreams, and your mind goes blank. Not because you haven't thought about it, but because you've never been allowed to own a thought. Your opinions shift with the company you keep. Your values bend to the room. You don't lie. You simply become whoever is easiest to love in that moment. And over time, the self becomes not a center, but a series of reflections, each one convincing, none of them lasting. This lack of a stable identity warps even the simplest decisions. What to eat? What to wear? Where to go? Each choice becomes a crisis, not because the options are difficult, but because there is no internal compass. You don't ask, "What do I want?" because the answer is unknown. You ask, "What would they want?" or "What would make me seem normal, even in solitude?" You perform. You scroll through your thoughts like a menu, trying on identities. Asterisk, could I be the kind of person who likes poetry? The kind who meditates? The kind who travels alone? Asterisk, but none of them feel like belonging. They feel like costumes. And so, you remain in flux, a person shaped by context, not conviction. The deeper tragedy is that this condition is often invisible. To the outside world, you may seem adaptable, charismatic, easygoing. You get along with everyone. You fit in everywhere. But inside, there is a quiet terror, the fear that you are not a person, but a collection of masks, none of which are yours. You may envy those who speak with certainty, who know their likes and dislikes, who don't second-guess every word. You watch them with a kind of awe, wondering how they built a self so solid, so real. And you begin to suspect that you are fundamentally broken, that you missed some essential step in becoming human. But identity diffusion is not a flaw. It is a consequence. A survival strategy refined over years of emotional navigation in unsafe waters. If you were never given the space to explore who you were, if every attempt at autonomy was met with guilt, withdrawal, or punishment, then of course you learned to disappear. Of course you became what was needed. The mind does not choose fragmentation. It chooses safety. And in the absence of unconditional acceptance, the self dissolves into roles, because roles are survivable. Being you is not. Healing begins not with forcing identity, but with creating space for it to emerge. It starts with small acts of self-witnessing, noticing what you feel, even if you don't understand it. Allowing yourself to want something, even if it contradicts who you've been. Saying, tentatively, "I don't know who I am," and finding that, in the saying, a flicker of truth appears. It means tolerating the discomfort of not knowing. Of being inconsistent. Of changing your mind. Of realizing that a self is not a fixed statue, but a living thing, grown slowly, through attention, through permission, through the quiet courage of being seen, even by yourself. And as we rest in this uncertainty, another distortion arises, one that bends not just the self, but time itself. If you don't know who you are now, how can you trust the present? What if you've been living as if life hasn't started yet? Let us now drift into the quiet suspension of living in the future tense. There's a quiet sentence that echoes through countless lives, whispered in the dark hours before sleep, murmured over coffee, buried beneath the rhythm of daily routines. I'll be happy when I get the promotion. When I move to that city. When I meet the right person. When I lose the weight. When I finally have enough. When the chaos settles. When I'm not so tired. When things are better. It sounds harmless. Hopeful, even. A promise to the self, asterisk, just endure a little longer. The real life is coming, asterisk, but beneath that promise lies a red flag so subtle it's almost invisible, the belief that life hasn't started yet. That the present is not living, but waiting. That everything before someday is merely preparation, rehearsal, survival. And in that belief, something essential is lost, the only moment we ever truly have. This mindset, living in the future tense, is not laziness. It is not lack of gratitude. It is a deeply ingrained psychological pattern, often born in cultures that glorify achievement, productivity, and delayed gratification. From childhood, we are conditioned to see life as a series of milestones. Good grades lead to a good school, which leads to a good job, which leads to a good life. Happiness is not a state to be cultivated, but a prize to be earned after sufficient effort. The message is clear, asterisk, endure now. Live later, asterisk, and so, the mind enters a loop, suffer now, succeed later, work now, rest later, sacrifice now, heal later. But later is a moving target. The moment you reach one goal, another appears. The finish line shifts. The bar rises. And the present, once again, becomes a means to an end, something to be endured, not experienced. Psychologically, this is tied to temporal discounting, the tendency to value future rewards more than present ones, even when the present holds real peace, connection, or joy. We discount the now because it feels incomplete. It lacks the polish of the imagined future. In that future, you are thinner, calmer, richer, loved. In that future, the anxiety lifts. The loneliness ends. The weight falls away. But the present? The present is messy, uncertain, unfinished. And so, it is dismissed. You don't rest because you're not there yet. You don't celebrate because it's not real until X happens. You don't allow yourself comfort because you haven't earned it. The present becomes a purgatory, a waiting room with no clock, no windows, no indication of when you'll be called. The deeper tragedy is not that someday never comes. It's that when it does, you may not recognize it. Imagine finally achieving the dream, the job, the relationship, the body, the home. You arrive. And instead of relief, there's a strange emptiness. A whisper, is this it? Because the mind has been so fixated on arrival, it never learned how to be present. You've spent so long preparing for life that you forgot how to live it. The joy you imagine is muted, distant, as if you're watching it through glass. You may even sabotage it, create new problems, set new goals, manufacture new crises, just to restore the familiar tension of striving. Because in a strange way, the struggle feels more real than the peace. This red flag warps your relationship with time. The past becomes a story of not yet. The future, a fantasy of finally. And the present? The present becomes invisible. You eat without tasting. Walk without feeling the ground. Speak without listening to your own voice. You are always somewhere else, planning, replaying, anticipating. Even in moments of beauty, your mind is already editing them into memories or projecting them into future nostalgia. You don't feel the sun on your skin. You think, I should take a picture for later. You don't savor the laughter of a friend. You wonder when you'll have this again. The now is never allowed to be enough, because enough is always one step ahead. And in this endless deferral, something erodes: presence. The ability to be here, fully, without agenda. The capacity to feel joy without waiting for it to be justified. The simple act of noticing your breath, the light through the trees, the warmth of a blanket, is lost beneath the noise of when. You begin to live like a ghost in your own life, haunting the future while your present slips through your fingers like sand. The mind-bending truth is that life is not a destination. It is not a series of checkpoints to be cleared. It is not something that begins after the pain ends. Life is happening now. In the exhaustion. In the uncertainty. In the quiet moments between thoughts. And if you keep waiting for it to start, you may miss it entirely. Not in a dramatic way. Not with a crash. But slowly, quietly, like a song playing in another room, fading until you can't hear it at all. Healing begins not in chasing the future, but in turning toward the present, even when it's imperfect. In allowing yourself to say, *, this is it. This is life. Not later. Not when. Now, *, it means noticing the small things, the way your hands feel as they hold a cup of tea, the sound of rain on the roof, the way your chest rises and falls with each breath. It means resisting the urge to push through, to rush ahead, to dismiss the moment as not real. It means asking, gently, *, what if I don't have to earn this? What if I can be here, now, without conditions, *? And as we soften into this fragile presence, another question arises, one that pulls us backward, into the shadows we thought we'd left behind. If the present feels unreal, what about the past? What if, beneath the surface of now, old pain still lives, waiting, breathing, shaping everything you feel? Let us now drift into the haunting grip of reliving old pain. You're standing in line at a grocery store. The air is warm. The fluorescent lights hum softly. A child laughs somewhere nearby. It's an ordinary moment, until it isn't. A voice behind you rises slightly, sharp with impatience. Not loud. Not even directed at you. But something in the tone, the pitch, the urgency, sends a jolt through your body. Your breath catches. Your chest tightens. Your hands grow cold. In an instant, you are no longer in the grocery store. You are 8 years old, pressed against the wall, heart pounding, waiting for the next shout, the next slammed door, the next wave of anger that will crash over you without warning. The present dissolves. The past floods in. And you are trapped there, fully, viscerally, though the world around you continues, unaware. This is not memory. This is not nostalgia. This is the red flag, reliving old pain as if it were happening now. Trauma, not as a story you tell, but as a reality you re-enter without consent. Trauma does not live in the past the way most memories do. It doesn't sit quietly in the archives of the mind, retrievable only when summoned. Instead, it embeds itself in the nervous system, in the muscles, in the breath, in the split-second reactions that happen before thought. When we speak of post-traumatic stress, we often imagine flashbacks as cinematic replays, images of past events flashing behind the eyes. But for many, the experience is far more insidious. It is a full-body reenactment. A tone of voice, a certain smell, a pattern of light through a window, any of these can become a trigger, bypassing the rational mind entirely and activating the ancient survival circuits deep within the brain. The amygdala, the alarm center, fires before the prefrontal cortex, the seat of logic and awareness, has time to intervene. Your body reacts before you understand why. You're not remembering trauma. You are reliving it. And in that moment, time collapses. The years between then and now vanish. You are not an adult in a safe space. You are a child in danger. Again. This is not a failure of will. It is not weakness. It is the body doing exactly what it was designed to do, protect you from threat. But when the threat was chronic, unpredictable, or inescapable, especially in childhood, the nervous system becomes hypervigilant, trained to respond to the smallest cues of danger. A raised voice. A sudden movement. A silence that feels heavy with unspoken anger. These are not just reminders of past pain. They are interpreted by the body as current threats. And so, the fight-flight-freeze response kicks in, adrenaline surges, muscles tense, vision narrows, thoughts scatter. You might lash out, shut down, or freeze in place, reacting not to what is happening now, but to what happened then. And when the moment passes, when you return to the present, you may feel disoriented, ashamed, or exhausted, wondering why you overreacted, when in truth, you didn't react at all. You responded to a past that never left. The mind-bending truth of this red flag is this: you can be completely safe and utterly terrified at the same time. You can stand in a sunlit room, surrounded by love, and still feel the icy grip of abandonment. You can be hugged by someone gentle and still flinch as if expecting a blow. The mind knows you are not in danger, but the body does not believe it. And over time, this dissonance becomes its own kind of suffering. You begin to distrust your own reactions. You question your reality. You apologize for responses you cannot control. You may even isolate yourself, avoiding situations, people, or sounds that could awaken the past. But the triggers are everywhere. Because the world is full of echoes. And the deeper implication is this: trauma distorts time. It doesn't just live in memory. It lives in the present, shaping how you see, hear, feel, and relate. A partner's momentary distraction becomes proof of rejection, just as your parents' emotional absence once felt like annihilation. A friend's canceled plan feels like abandonment, not because it is, but because it resonates with the countless times you were left waiting, hoping, unseen. The past is not a chapter closed. It is a current running beneath the surface of every interaction, coloring your perception, tightening your breath, narrowing your world. You are not haunted by ghosts. You are living with a nervous system that never got the message, asterisk it's over. You survived. You're safe now, asterisk. Healing, then, is not about forgetting. It is not about pushing the pain down or moving on. It is about retraining the body. About helping the nervous system learn, slowly and gently, that not every raised voice leads to violence, not every silence means rejection, not every shadow is a threat. It is about creating safety in the present, through breath, through touch, through connection, until the body begins to trust again. It is about learning to say, in moments of reactivation, asterisk this is a trigger. I am not there. I am here. I am safe, asterisk not as a mantra, but as a truth the body can eventually believe. And as we begin to anchor into the present, another fracture emerges, one quieter, more internal. If the past invades the present so completely, what happens to the self? What if, beneath the layers of survival, you no longer recognize your own reflection? What if the person you feel inside doesn't match the one the world sees? Let us now turn gently into the quiet disorientation of internal self-alienation. You stand in front of the mirror, towel around your shoulders after a shower, and for a fleeting moment, the face looking back feels like someone else's. Not in the jarring way of dissociation, not with the detachment of depersonalization, but with a quiet, sinking unease, like recognizing a distant relative whose name you can't recall. The eyes are yours. The scars, the lines, the shape of the jaw, all familiar, and yet, something is missing. There's no warmth in the recognition. No sense of homecoming. Just a stranger wearing your skin. Or perhaps you speak in a meeting, your voice calm and confident, and afterward, you wonder, who was that? Not with pride, but with a hollow curiosity, as if someone else had borrowed your body and spoken in your place. This is the red flag, internal self-alienation, the slow, often imperceptible erosion of feeling like yourself. Not a dramatic loss, but a quiet exile. A life lived in the third person. Self-alienation is not the same as identity diffusion, though they are cousins. It is not the absence of a self, but the disconnection from one. It happens when the roles you play, the masks you wear, the versions of you shaped by others' expectations, become so ingrained that the original voice, the inner pulse, the authentic desire, fades into background noise. You go through the motions, you smile when expected, agree when convenient, perform when necessary. You meet deadlines, keep promises, maintain relationships. To the outside world, you are coherent, functional, even admirable. But inside, there is a growing distance between you and the one living your life. Your thoughts feel rehearsed. Your emotions feel delayed, as if arriving through a filter. Your choices feel made by someone else, someone who knows what to do, but not what to want. You are present, but not inhabited. This condition often takes root in environments where authenticity was unsafe. If expressing your true feelings led to punishment, dismissal, or emotional withdrawal, you learned to edit yourself. If your needs were seen as burdens, your dreams as impractical, your sensitivity as weakness, you began to silence the inner voice before it could speak. Over time, this suppression becomes habitual. You don't just hide your truth, you forget it. The child who loved to draw stops drawing not because they lost interest, but because no one noticed, and eventually, they stopped noticing themselves. The teenager who felt deeply stopped sharing not because they feel less, but because their depth was mocked, and so they buried it. The adult who longs for solitude chooses constant company because aloneness feels like abandonment. Each act of self-betrayal is small, almost invisible. But together, they form a wall between you and your own soul. It is especially common in chronic people-pleasing, where the self is shaped entirely around the needs of others. You become a mirror, reflecting back what people want to see. You anticipate moods, adjust tones, suppress opinions, all to maintain harmony, to be liked, to be needed. But the cost is invisibility. You stop asking, "What do I need?" because the answer has been irrelevant for so long. You stop noticing your own desires because they've been overridden so many times they no longer rise to the surface. And when, in rare moments of stillness, a true impulse emerges, a sudden urge to quit your job, to speak honestly, to wear the color you've always loved but never dared, you meet it with suspicion. Is this really me, you wonder? Asterisk, or am I just tired? Confused? Having a phase, asterisk, the self feels like a rumor. The existential weight of this red flag lies in its silence. There is no crisis, no breakdown, no dramatic unraveling. Just a persistent, low-grade sense of unreality. You may have everything you thought you wanted, a stable job, a loving partner, a comfortable life, and yet, you feel like an imposter in it. Not because you don't deserve it, but because it doesn't feel like yours. It feels like a life you were handed, not one you chose. You follow the script, but you don't remember writing it. And the deeper you go, the more the question takes shape. If I'm not who I've been pretending to be, who am I? Not in a philosophical way, but in a visceral, trembling way. As if the answer could shatter everything. This is the exile of self-alienation, to live in a world where you are seen, but not seen through. To be known by name, but not known deeply. To be surrounded by people who love you, while you feel utterly alone with the truth, that they love a version of you that isn't fully real. And the tragedy is that you may not even know how to show them the rest. The door to the inner world has been closed for so long it's grown over. You don't know the language anymore. You don't trust the feelings that rise, uninvited, like ghosts from a forgotten room. Healing begins not with grand revelations, but with small acts of reacquaintance. With pausing in the middle of the day and asking, what do I actually feel right now? With noticing the subtle pull toward a certain color, song, or silence, not because it's practical, but because it resonates. With allowing yourself to want something, even if it contradicts the image you've built. It means tolerating the discomfort of not knowing, of being inconsistent, of changing your mind. It means understanding that the self is not a fixed statue, but a living thing, grown slowly, through attention, through permission, through the courage to be witnessed, even by yourself. And as we turn inward, as we begin to listen for the voice beneath the noise, another layer emerges, one that shapes how we see the world. If we feel alien to ourselves, how can we trust others? How can we believe in their intentions when we no longer recognize our own? Let us now drift into the quiet suspicion of seeing manipulation in every gesture. You're having coffee with a friend when they say, "I really admire how you handled that situation at work. You stayed so calm." It should feel good. It should feel like connection. But instead, a quiet ripple moves through you, not warmth, but weariness. Why are they saying this now, you wonder? Asterisk, do they want something? Are they setting me up for a request? Is this flattery before a favor? Asterisk, the words were kind, the tone sincere, but your mind doesn't rest. It begins to sift, to analyze, to reconstruct the interaction like a detective reviewing surveillance footage. Even a simple "I love you" from someone close can land not as comfort, but as a question. What do they need from me? This is the red flag, the unconscious belief that no gesture is ever truly innocent, that every kindness carries a hidden cost, that love, praise, and help are never given freely, only strategically. It is not paranoia. It is hypervigilance. And it is born not of distrust of others, but of the deep, unhealed memory of betrayal. This mindset does not appear out of nowhere. It grows in soil watered by repeated emotional exploitation, by relationships where affection was conditional, where care was weaponized, where love came with strings so fine you didn't notice them until they tightened. Perhaps your caregiver offered warmth only when you obeyed. Perhaps a partner used compliments to disarm you before delivering criticism. Perhaps a friend helped you only to later remind you of the debt. In environments like these, the brain adapts. It learns that connection is not safety, it is risk. That vulnerability is not intimacy, it is exposure. And so, it develops a survival mechanism, constant scanning. Every word is analyzed for subtext. Every smile is measured for authenticity. Every act of kindness is weighed against what might come next. You become a student of human behavior, not out of curiosity, but out of self-preservation. You learn to read micro-expressions, tone shifts, silences. You anticipate the drop after the rise, the withdrawal after the affection. And over time, this vigilance becomes automatic, so seamless that you no longer notice you're doing it. You don't think, "I'm being cautious," you simply feel that something is off, even when nothing is. Psychologically, this is not a flaw in perception. It is a recalibration of reality. When you've lived through manipulation, especially chronic, subtle forms like gaslighting, guilt-tripping, or love-bombing followed by neglect, your nervous system begins to treat emotional generosity as a potential threat. Trust isn't just difficult, it feels dangerous. Because the last time you trusted, you were hurt. Not dramatically, perhaps, but insidiously, through broken promises disguised as forgetfulness, through affection used as leverage, through love that vanished the moment you stopped being useful. And so, the mind defaults to skepticism. It would rather be alone than tricked. It would rather be cold than burned. Better to assume the worst and be proven wrong than to believe in goodness and be shattered again. But the deeper tragedy of this red flag is its self-fulfilling nature. The more you expect manipulation, the more you create distance. You withhold vulnerability. You test people. You pull away when they get close. You interpret neutral actions as red flags. A delayed text becomes proof of disinterest. A compliment feels like flattery. A kind gesture seems like a bid for control. And in doing so, you may push away the very people who are trying, genuinely, to connect. The loyal friend who offers help without agenda begins to feel unappreciated, then resentful, then distant. The partner who says I love you without wanting anything in return starts to wonder if their affection is unwelcome. Over time, your relationships begin to reflect your fears, not because others are manipulative, but because your defenses make intimacy impossible. You end up alone, not because no one can be trusted, but because trust has become unbearable. And in that solitude, the old narrative is confirmed, *C. No one truly cares. Everyone wants something, *. This red flag doesn't just distort relationships. It distorts reality itself. The world begins to feel like a stage where everyone is performing, where every interaction is a negotiation, where love is a currency and kindness a strategy. Joy becomes suspicious. Generosity feels like a trap. And in the absence of safe connection, you may start to believe that this is just how people are, that beneath every smile is an agenda, beneath every "I'm here for you" is a demand. But this is not truth. It is trauma's logic. It is the mind protecting itself by narrowing the world to what it knows, that love can hurt, that people can leave, that safety is temporary. And so, it refuses the possibility of something softer, something real. Healing does not begin with forcing trust. That would be dangerous, even cruel. It begins with awareness. With noticing the moment the alarm sounds, not to shame it, but to understand it. * What memory lives in this fear? Who taught me that kindness has a price? * It means learning to distinguish between real danger and old echoes. It means allowing space for the possibility that some people can care without wanting anything in return. That some love is unconditional. That some gestures are simple. Not all at once. Not with everyone. But in small moments, with a stranger's genuine smile, a friend's consistent presence, a quiet act of kindness that asks for nothing back. And as we begin to soften our guard, another question stirs, one that turns the gaze inward. If we've spent so long questioning others' motives, what about our own? What if, beneath the suspicion, there's a deeper hunger, not for control, but for proof that we exist? Let us now drift into the quiet, persistent need to be told, again and again, that we are real, the red flag of craving external validation. You press share on a photo, a moment of beauty, a quiet triumph, a version of yourself you carefully curated. The screen goes still. You set your phone down, but your mind doesn't. It circles back, again and again, like a moth drawn to flame. * Has anyone seen it? Did someone like it? Comment? Tag me? Minutes pass. An hour. The silence grows heavier. No notifications. No digital echo. And then, slowly, a hollow opens in your chest. Not anger, not sadness, but something deeper, the sensation of dissolving. As if, without a single heart or comment, you were never there at all. This is the red flag, the quiet, consuming need for external validation, not as a fleeting desire for connection, but as the very foundation of your sense of existence. Without proof that you've been seen, you begin to wonder if you're real. This craving does not begin in vanity. It begins in survival. Imagine a child who only received attention when they succeeded, when they brought home the perfect report card, when they won the game, when they made everyone laugh at dinner. The rest of the time, when they were quiet, struggling, or simply being, there was no acknowledgement. No touch. No "I see you." Over time, the subconscious learns a devastating equation. I am worthy when I am noticed. I am invisible when I am still. Love, in this world, is not a given. It is earned. And so, the mind begins to seek confirmation, not just from parents, but from teachers, peers, friends, lovers, anyone who can hold up a mirror and say, "Yes, you matter." The brain wires itself to scan for signs of approval. A smile. A compliment. A nod. Each one delivers a microdose of relief, a fleeting sense of being real. And when that feedback is absent, the nervous system interprets it as rejection, not just of the action, but of the self. In adulthood, this pattern doesn't vanish. It evolves. It finds new stages, new audiences, new metrics. The classroom becomes the workplace. The playground becomes social media. The parent's approval becomes the algorithm's reward. A promotion, a follower count, a well-liked post, these become the modern currency of worth. And with each like, each comment, each "you're amazing," the brain releases a burst of dopamine, reinforcing the loop. Perform. Be seen. Feel real. But the high is temporary. The silence always returns. And so, the performance begins again. Another post. Another effort. Another gesture designed not for joy, but for recognition. You don't share because you want to express, you share because you need to be confirmed. You don't speak because you have something to say, you speak because you need to be heard. The self becomes not a sender, but a reflection, dependent on the gaze of others to know it exists. The tragedy of this red flag is not that you want to be loved. That is human. The tragedy is that the more you seek validation, the more you lose touch with yourself. You begin to shape your choices, your words, even your emotions around what will be received, praised, celebrated. You suppress the parts of you that don't fit, the quiet thoughts, the unpopular opinions, the desires that don't align with others' expectations. Over time, you stop asking, "What do I feel?" and start asking, "How will this be received?" You become porous, like a sponge absorbing the moods and values of those around you. You agree when you disagree. You laugh when you're numb. You say "I'm fine" when you're breaking. And in the process, the inner voice, the one that once whispered your truths, grows fainter, until you can no longer hear it at all. This erosion of self-trust is subtle, almost imperceptible. You don't wake up one day and realize you've lost yourself. You wake up over and over, each time a little more disconnected, a little more dependent on the outside world to tell you who you are. You may achieve great things, applause, success, admiration, and still feel empty. Because the validation never fills the void. It only delays it. The moment the praise ends, the silence returns, and with it, the old fear. Am I enough when no one is watching? And so, you seek more. Not because you're greedy, but because you're trying to survive in a world where your worth was never unconditional. Social media, with its endless feedback loops, amplifies this dynamic to an almost unbearable degree. It turns identity into a live performance, judged in real time. A post that doesn't gain traction feels like a personal failure. A friend's post with hundreds of likes becomes a quiet indictment. Why isn't that me? Even private moments, grief, joy, doubt, are filtered through the lens of how they might be perceived. You don't cry because you're sad. You wonder, would sharing this make me seem strong or weak? The self becomes a brand, and authenticity becomes a strategy. And in this economy of attention, the deepest human need, to be seen for who you are, gets distorted into a desperate plea. Asterisk, look at me. Confirm me. Tell me I exist. Asterisk. But healing begins not in rejecting validation, but in witnessing the need for it. In asking, gently, asterisk, who first made me feel invisible? When did I learn that love had to be earned? Asterisk, it means allowing yourself to feel the ache of not being seen, not to punish yourself, but to honor the child who waited, quietly, for someone to say, asterisk, I notice you. Just as you are, asterisk, it means practicing presence without performance. Sitting in silence without reaching for your phone. Speaking without checking the reaction. Creating not for likes, but for the way it feels in your hands, your heart, your breath. And as we begin to rest in that quiet, another storm may rise, one not from the outside, but from within. When the world fails to reflect you, when the silence grows too loud, the past may answer. Not in memory, but in sensation. Let us now drift into the silent flood of emotional flashbacks. You're standing in your kitchen on an ordinary morning. The sun spills across the counter. You pour water into the kettle, flick it on, and turn away to gather your cup and spoon. The silence is soft, familiar. And then, the whistle. A sudden, high-pitched cry cutting through the stillness. You freeze. Not because the sound is dangerous. Not because anything has gone wrong. But because, in that instant, your chest collapses inward. Your breath vanishes. A wave of shame crashes over you so completely, so unexpectedly, that your knees nearly buckle. Tears spill without warning. You don't know why. No memory surfaces. No image of a past event flickers behind your eyes. Just feeling, raw, overwhelming, ancient. You are not in your kitchen anymore. You are somewhere else. Sometime else. And the person you were 5 minutes ago, the calm, functional adult making coffee, feels like a distant dream. This is not a panic attack. It is not depression. It is an emotional flashback, the body reliving trauma the mind cannot recall. Unlike narrative flashbacks, which unfold like scenes from a forgotten film, faces, voices, places, emotional flashbacks are pure sensation. They carry no story, no context, only the full weight of an emotion that belongs to the past but erupts violently in the present. It might be terror, as though you're being hunted. It might be worthlessness, a crushing sense that you are fundamentally broken. It might be abandonment, a primal fear that no one will ever come for you. These feelings surge with such intensity that they feel like truth, even when your rational mind insists, asterisk, there is no threat. I am safe. Nothing is wrong, asterisk, but logic cannot calm the nervous system once it has been hijacked. The body does not operate on facts. It operates on survival. And for those whose early years were marked by emotional neglect, abuse, or unpredictable caregiving, the body learned long ago that safety is an illusion. It remains locked in a state of hypervigilance, scanning the environment not for joy, but for danger, however subtle. A tone of voice. A slammed door. A pause in conversation. A flicker of impatience in someone's eyes. These are not just moments. They are triggers, tiny keys that unlock vast chambers of unprocessed pain. The whistle of the kettle, for instance, may not be about the sound itself, but about what it represents in the subconscious, a sudden, uncontrollable noise that once preceded a parent's rage. Or perhaps silence after a request, just like when you were small, and your plea for comfort was met with cold stillness. The nervous system does not distinguish between then and now. It only knows that this sensation once meant danger. And so, it responds as if the danger is here again. This is the hallmark of complex post-traumatic stress, CPTSD, not a single traumatic event, but a lifetime of micro-traumas that condition the body to live in a perpetual state of alert. The trauma isn't in the memory. It's in the muscle, in the breath, in the way your hands tremble when no one is watching. The mind-bending truth of emotional flashbacks is this: you can be completely safe and utterly shattered at the same time. You can be loved, housed, fed, and surrounded by kindness, yet feel like a terrified child crouched in the dark. This is not contradiction. It is dissociation in motion. The adult self knows where you are. The wounded self remembers where you were. And in the absence of integration, the two realities collide. You are both here and there. Both grown and small. Both safe and in danger. And because there is no narrative to explain the flood of emotion, you are left with only shame. Why am I like this? Why can't I handle a whistle? A look? A quiet moment? You may scold yourself for overreacting, not realizing that you are not reacting to the present at all. You are finally feeling what you could not feel when it first happened, when you were too young, too powerless, too afraid to process it. The emotion was buried, not healed. And now, decades later, it has surfaced. This red flag is especially insidious because it masquerades as instability. You may believe you are too sensitive, dramatic, or broken. But emotional flashbacks are not signs of weakness. They are signs of survival. They are the psyche's delayed response to overwhelming experiences that could not be integrated at the time. When a child is repeatedly shamed, ignored, or frightened, their only option is to dissociate, to disconnect from the emotion in order to endure it. The feelings are not gone. They are stored. And one day, when the nervous system finally feels safe enough to release them, they return with full force. It is not regression. It is reclamation. The body is saying, I remember. I felt this. I never got to grieve it, The implications are profound. Without understanding emotional flashbacks, you may spend years misdiagnosing your pain. You may seek solutions in willpower, when what you need is compassion. You may isolate yourself, fearing you are too much, when in truth, you are carrying too much history, too much unspoken grief, too much love that was never given. You may avoid relationships, not because you dislike people, but because every interaction risks triggering a wave you cannot predict or control. And in the aftermath, you may apologize, withdraw, or numb yourself, anything to restore the illusion of stability. Healing begins not in suppressing these waves, but in naming them. In learning to say, this is not me. This is a flashback, in placing a hand on your chest and whispering, you're safe now. That was then. This is now, it means developing tools, breath, grounding, self-soothing, to gently guide the nervous system back to the present. It means cultivating patience with yourself, not as a project to fix, but as a being who has survived and is now learning how to live. And as we learn to weather these internal storms, another question arises, one that shapes how we navigate the world. When emotions surge without warning, when the past invades the present, how do you protect yourself? What happens when the instinct to say no has been erased by years of compliance? Let us now turn toward the quiet erosion of boundaries, the red flag of never being able to say no. It begins with something small. A friend texts late at night, "Can you help me move this weekend? You're already overwhelmed, work has been relentless, your body aches with fatigue, your mind craves stillness." But you pause. You hesitate. And then, before you've even consulted your own needs, your fingers type, "Yeah, of course." "No problem," the words leave a faint sourness in your chest, like swallowing something slightly off, but you dismiss it. You're being kind, helpful, reliable. The next day, a colleague asks you to take on an extra project. You nod, smile, say, "I'll make it work." Later, a family member calls, needing emotional support during their crisis, again, and though you've been carrying your own unspoken weight for weeks, you say, "anytime. I'm here for you, each time." The inner voice that whispers, "I can't, I'm full, I need to rest," is gently, quietly silenced. Not with force, not with drama, but with habit. With the reflex of someone who has long ago learned that peace is bought through compliance. This is the red flag, the inability to set boundaries, not because you don't know how, but because, somewhere deep in your nervous system, saying no feels more dangerous than self-abandonment. Boundarylessness does not begin in weakness. It begins in survival. Imagine a child who learned early that their needs were burdens. That asking for comfort was met with impatience. That expressing hunger for attention was labeled needy. That voicing a boundary, "I don't want to be hugged," "I need space, I'm not ready," was met with dismissal, guilt, or withdrawal of love. In such environments, the message is clear: to be loved, you must be small. To be safe, you must be agreeable. To belong, you must disappear. Over time, the child learns that love is conditional on self-effacement. And so, they mold themselves into a shape that is easy to hold, flexible, accommodating, endlessly giving. They become experts at reading the emotional weather of others, adjusting their presence to keep the peace. They learn to say yes before the request is even fully spoken. Not out of generosity, but out of a quiet, ever-present fear, "If I say no, they'll leave. If I disappoint them, I'll be rejected. If I take up space, I'll be too much." This conditioning becomes neurobiological. The nervous system, trained to prioritize relational safety over personal integrity, begins to interpret self-assertion as threat. The moment you consider saying no, your body may respond before your mind can catch up. Your breath shortens, your chest tightens, a wave of anxiety rises. It's not logic. It's memory. It's the echo of every time a boundary was met with punishment, silence, or emotional withdrawal. And so, you comply. You override your exhaustion, your discomfort, your truth, because the cost of asserting it feels higher than the cost of erasure. You say yes to favors you don't have the energy for. You agree to plans that drain you. You stay in conversations long after you've wanted to leave. You give your time, your attention, your emotional labor, until there is nothing left for yourself. And still, you keep giving, because to stop feels like betrayal, not of others, but of the role you've been cast in, the helper, the fixer, the peacekeeper, the one who holds everything together. The deeper cost of this red flag is not just fatigue. It is the slow, quiet accumulation of resentment, not toward others, but toward yourself. You begin to hate the version of you that always says yes. The one who cancels their own plans, ignores their body's signals, silences their own needs. You watch, with a kind of detached horror, as you once again agree to something you don't want to do, and you think, why can't I just say no? But the answer is not in willpower. It is in history. It is in the years of conditioning that taught you that your worth is tied to your utility. That you are loved not for who you are, but for what you do for others. And so, you keep performing, even as the inner well runs dry. Over time, you may become a ghost in your own life, present in body, but absent in spirit. You go through the motions, fulfill the roles, wear the smiles, but inside, there is a growing distance between you and your choices. You don't feel like the author of your life. You feel like its caretaker. And the irony is profound. The very people you sacrifice for may not even respect you more for it. In fact, unconsciously, they may begin to take you for granted, not because they are unkind, but because boundaries are invisible until they are named. When you never say no, others assume you have endless capacity. They assume you don't mind. They assume you want to do it. And in the absence of limits, your generosity becomes expected, not cherished. You are not seen as selfless. You are seen as available. And availability, without consent, is not love, it is erosion. This red flag is not about selfishness. It is about the loss of self. It is about living a life shaped entirely by external demands, with no room for internal truth. And healing does not begin with dramatic confrontations or angry declarations. It begins in the smallest moments. In the breath before you reply. In the courage to say, let me check my schedule, instead of instantly agreeing. In the practice of pausing, feeling your body, asking, what do I truly need right now? It means learning to tolerate the discomfort of potential disapproval. Of silence. Of someone being disappointed. It means understanding that a boundary is not a wall. It is a marker of self-respect. A declaration, *I am here. I matter. My limits are real, *. And as we begin to reclaim the right to say no, another question stirs, one that runs even deeper. If peace feels unsafe, if stillness feels like betrayal, what if, beneath the exhaustion, there is a quiet longing for pain? What if suffering has become the only proof that you are alive? Let us now drift into the dangerous romance of idealizing pain. There is a quiet pride in your exhaustion. You speak of your insomnia like a badge of honor, as if sleeplessness were proof of a mind too rich, too restless, too profound for ordinary rest. You wear your heartbreak like poetry, reciting its verses in conversation, shaping your identity around the ache of what was lost. You describe your anxiety not as a burden, but as sensitivity, a sign that you feel more, see deeper, love harder than others. There's a subtle reverence in the way you talk about your pain, as if it were not something to heal, but something to be. And in that reverence, a red flag flickers, the unconscious belief that suffering is not just inevitable, but elevating. That to hurt is to be real. That to bleed is to be true. That peace, by comparison, is shallow. This is not mere melancholy. This is the romanticization of suffering, a quiet, insidious conviction that your worth is measured not in joy, but in the depth of your wounds. This mindset does not arise in a vacuum. It grows in the fertile soil of emotional neglect, where pain was the only time you were truly seen. Imagine a childhood where your laughter went unnoticed, but your tears summoned attention. Where your achievements were met with a passing good job, but your breakdowns brought comfort, presence, even admiration. Over time, the subconscious learns a silent equation: Asterisk I am invisible when I am well. I am real when I am broken. Asterisk joy becomes background noise. Suffering becomes the foreground. And so, you begin to associate emotional intensity with authenticity. To feel calm is to feel numb. To feel safe is to feel boring. To be happy is to be superficial. In this internal logic, pain is not a signal of harm, it is proof of depth. The more you hurt, the more you believe you are alive, sensitive, real. This phenomenon is amplified by cultural narratives that glorify the tortured soul. The artist who creates masterpieces through depression. The lover whose passion is proven by jealousy and heartbreak. The visionary whose brilliance is inseparable from their instability. We celebrate the anguished poet, the brooding genius, the martyr of love, while quietly dismissing the person who is at peace as uninteresting, complacent, or inauthentic. In this mythology, healing is not liberation, it is a loss of edge. Wellness is not freedom, it is dullness. And so, the psyche begins to equate stability with emptiness. You may look at someone who is calm, content, grounded, and think, asterisk, they don't understand. They haven't suffered. They haven't felt, asterisk, and in that judgment, you protect your own pain, not because you enjoy it, but because it has become the foundation of your identity. The deeper tragedy of this red flag is not that you suffer. It is that you begin to fear its absence. Healing starts to feel like betrayal, not of others, but of yourself. If you are no longer anxious, who are you? If you are no longer heartbroken, what story do you tell? If you are no longer in crisis, what gives your life meaning? The mind begins to sabotage peace, not out of self-destruction, but out of loyalty to the only self it recognizes. You may withdraw from a healthy relationship because it lacks the familiar fire of chaos. You may abandon a stable job because it doesn't make you suffer enough to feel passionate. You may fall back into old patterns of self-neglect, not because you hate yourself, but because self-care feels like cheating, like you're abandoning the version of you that endured, survived, mattered. And in this loop, suffering becomes not a temporary state, but a permanent identity. You are not someone experiencing pain. You are the wounded one, the sensitive one, the one who has seen the dark. And while there is truth in the depth that can come from struggle, there is also a dangerous conflation, mistaking pain for profundity. True depth is not in the wound. It is in the tending of it. It is not in the darkness, but in the courage to seek light. It is not in the crisis, but in the quiet choice to heal, even when no one is watching, even when it feels ordinary. The paradox is devastating. The more you romanticize suffering, the more you reject the very thing that could set you free. You may resent those who seem at peace, not out of envy, but because their calm highlights your entrapment. You may dismiss therapy, rest, or joy as avoidance, when in fact, they are acts of rebellion against the narrative that says you must suffer to be worthy. And the deepest irony? The people who have truly endured often speak not of their pain, but of their survival. Not of their wounds, but of their resilience. They do not wear suffering like a crown. They carry it like a history, one that shaped them, but does not define them. Healing begins not in rejecting your pain, but in seeing it clearly. In asking, asterisk, did I earn attention only when I was hurting? Did I learn that love arrives with tears? Asterisk, it means allowing yourself to be seen in your wholeness, not just in your wounds, but in your rest, your laughter, your quiet moments of ordinary joy. It means understanding that depth is not a product of suffering, but of awareness. That you can be both soft and strong, both healed and wise. That you do not need to bleed to be real. And as we soften our grip on pain, as we begin to imagine a life where peace is not betrayal, another fear arises, one that trembles beneath the surface. If healing feels dangerous, what about being seen? What if, when someone looks at you without judgment, without agenda, you feel not relief, but terror? Let us now drift into the quiet, aching fear of being truly known. You sit across from someone who cares about you, really cares. The room is quiet. The air is soft. They look at you and say, "Tell me what's on your mind," not out of obligation, but with genuine curiosity. For a moment, something stirs in your chest, a flicker of hope, a quiet yearning to be seen, to finally let someone in. And then, just as quickly, a cold ripple spreads beneath your skin. Your breath tightens. Your thoughts scramble. You smile, deflect, say something light, "Oh, I'm fine. Just tired." The moment passes. The door closes. And you're back in the familiar space of surface talk, where no one gets too close, where you are known, but never known. This is the red flag, the deep, paradoxical fear of being truly seen. Not because you don't want connection, but because you do. And that desire terrifies you. This fear is not about distrust. It is not about disliking people. It is about the unbearable vulnerability of being loved for who you are, not for who you perform. If your early experiences of love were conditional, if affection was given only when you were good, quiet, helpful, or agreeable, you learned, long before words could form, that your worth was negotiable. That love came with strings. That to be seen in your messiness, your anger, your sadness, your need, was to risk abandonment. And so, you learned to hide. Not with lies, but with omission. With humor. With silence. You became skilled at showing the polished version, the capable one, the calm one, the one who doesn't burden others. Over time, this curated self became your primary identity. The real one, the one with doubts, fears, contradictions, was tucked away, not out of shame, but out of survival. To reveal it would be to risk everything. And so, when someone begins to see past the surface, when they notice your hesitation, your quiet sorrow, your unspoken tension, your nervous system sounds the alarm. Intimacy no longer feels like safety. It feels like exposure. Like standing naked in a crowd, waiting for the verdict. Asterisk, will they still stay? Will they still love me? Or will they finally see what I've always known, that I'm too much, too broken, too flawed to be loved unconditionally? Asterisk, the mind races ahead, rehearsing rejection before it happens. And so, you pull away. You create distance. You test their loyalty, saying something harsh, withdrawing affection, picking a fight, not because you want to hurt them, but because you need to know, will you leave when I'm not perfect? If they do, your fear is confirmed. If they stay, you may not believe it. Because love that persists through imperfection feels unreal, like a dream you're waiting to wake from. The mind-bending truth of this red flag is that you may unconsciously attract people who can't truly see you, those who are emotionally unavailable, distracted, or superficial, because they allow you to maintain the illusion of connection without the risk of true intimacy. You get to be close, but not too close. Seen, but not fully seen. Loved, but not in a way that threatens the walls you've built. In this way, the fear protects itself. It creates relationships that mirror your internal belief, that you are only lovable at a distance. And so, you remain lonely, not because you lack company, but because you lack witness. No one has looked into the depths of you and said, asterisk, I see you. All of you. And I'm still here, asterisk. This pattern reveals a soul that believes love is conditional on perfection. That you must earn it, maintain it, deserve it. That if people saw your shame, your envy, your quiet despair, your unmet needs, they would turn away. And so, you keep them at arm's length, not out of coldness, but out of a desperate, quiet love for the idea of being loved. You would rather be half-known than fully rejected. You would rather be admired for your strength than seen in your fragility. You would rather be alone with your longing than risk the collapse of being exposed. But the deeper tragedy is that in avoiding being known, you also avoid being healed. True healing does not happen in isolation. It happens in the presence of someone who sees your wounds and does not flinch. Who hears your truth and does not flee. Who holds your hand not because you are fixed, but because you are real. Without that mirror, you remain trapped in the old story, that you are unlovable as you are. And the longer you live there, the more you forget what it feels like to be held in your entirety. Healing begins not in forcing vulnerability, but in noticing the instinct to hide. In recognizing the moment you deflect, change the subject, or smile through pain, not as failure, but as protection. It means asking, gently, what am I afraid they'll see? What part of me do I believe is unacceptable? It means practicing small acts of exposure, saying I'm struggling, naming a fear, admitting a need, not to everyone, not all at once, but to someone safe. It means learning that love is not a prize for perfection, but a choice made again and again, even in the messy, uncertain, imperfect moments. And as we begin to soften our defenses, as we imagine the possibility of being seen without fear, another question arises, one that turns the gaze inward. If we hide from others, what do we do to ourselves? What happens when, over years of silence, we begin to betray our own truth, not in grand acts, but in quiet, daily surrenders? Let us now drift into the silent erosion of chronic self-betrayal. There is a moment, subtle and nearly silent, that happens 100 times over a lifetime. You're about to say no to a request that drains you, but something in your chest tightens, a flicker of guilt, a whisper of they'll be disappointed, and before you know it, your mouth moves on its own. Yeah, I can do that. Or you feel a deep pull towards solitude, a quiet voice saying, I need to rest, but you override it, telling yourself it's selfish, and agree to dinner with friends anyway. You stay in a relationship long after your soul has begun to shrink in its presence. You remain in a job that hollows you out, not because you have to, but because leaving feels like failure. These are not isolated lapses in judgment. They are symptoms of a deeper pattern, chronic self-betrayal, the quiet, cumulative act of choosing others over yourself, again and again, until you no longer recognize the person you've become. Self-betrayal is rarely dramatic. It does not announce itself with fanfare. It happens in the small silences, the unspoken boundary, the ignored intuition, the suppressed desire. It is the pause before you voice your opinion, followed by a nod and a smile. It is the way you laugh at a joke that offended you, just to keep the mood light. It is the way you schedule your life around others' needs, while your own remain buried beneath layers of I'll get to it later. It is not malice. It is not even conscious avoidance. It is habit. A reflex so deeply wired that it operates beneath awareness, like breathing. You don't wake up and decide to betray yourself. You simply live in a way that has always prioritized harmony over honesty, peace over presence, approval over authenticity. This pattern often begins in childhood, in environments where your needs were treated as burdens. If expressing a desire led to guilt, after all I've done for you, or if showing emotion invited punishment or withdrawal, you learned early that your truth was dangerous. That to want something was selfish. That to say no was unacceptable. That to disrupt the peace was unforgivable. So you adapted. You folded yourself inward. You learned to read the room, to anticipate moods, to adjust your presence to keep others comfortable. Over time, this became your survival strategy, Asterisk, if I make myself small, I will be loved. If I disappear, I will be safe. Asterisk, and so, you began to betray yourself, not in one grand act, but in 1,000 tiny surrenders. Each one a stitch in the fabric of a life lived for others. The deeper cost of this red flag is not exhaustion, though that comes too. It is the erosion of self-trust. When you repeatedly override your instincts, when you ignore the knot in your stomach, the voice in your chest, the quiet pull toward what feels right, you send a message to your psyche. Asterisk, your truth doesn't matter. Your needs are secondary. You are not to be believed. Asterisk, and over time, you stop listening. You begin to doubt your own perceptions. Was that really unfair? Am I really that tired? Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I'm too sensitive. The mind starts to question what the body knows. You develop anxiety not because life is inherently threatening, but because you are constantly at war with yourself. You may fall into depression, not from a single loss, but from the slow accumulation of unlived lives, unspoken truths, unacknowledged grief. And the body, always wiser than the mind, begins to speak in its own language. Chronic pain, insomnia, digestive issues, autoimmune flare-ups. These are not random malfunctions. They are the physical manifestations of a self that has been silenced for too long. Your body screams what your voice has been trained not to say. Asterisk, I am here. I am hurting. I need to be seen. Asterisk, because self-betrayal is not just emotional. It is somatic. It lives in the tension between what you feel and what you allow yourself to act on. It lives in the gap between your truth and your behavior. And that gap, stretched over years, becomes a wound. The tragedy is that this red flag masquerades as virtue. You call it kindness. You call it selflessness. You call it being a good person. But true kindness does not require self-erasure. True care does not demand invisibility. What you are practicing is not generosity, it is abandonment. The abandonment of your own inner authority. The quiet surrender of your right to exist on your own terms. And the irony is profound. The more you sacrifice yourself to keep others comfortable, the less authentic your presence becomes. People may appreciate your agreeability, but they do not encounter you. They meet a version shaped by compliance, not conviction. And in that performance, you lose not only your voice, but your vitality. Healing begins not in grand declarations, but in small acts of loyalty to yourself. In pausing before you say yes. In asking, what do I actually want, even if the answer is messy, inconvenient, or unpopular? In allowing yourself to change your mind. To cancel plans. To speak a truth that makes your hands shake. It means tolerating the discomfort of potential disapproval, not because you enjoy conflict, but because you value integrity more than approval. It means understanding that self-betrayal is not love, it is fear. And that true love, for others and for yourself, begins with the courage to be real. And as we begin to reclaim the right to honor our own truth, another question stirs, one that reveals a deeper hunger. If we no longer betray ourselves in silence, what if we still need to be needed? What if our worth has become entangled with being indispensable? Let us now drift into the quiet, aching need to be required, the red flag of deriving worth from being needed. There is a particular kind of aliveness that comes not from joy, but from urgency. A text arrives, asterisk, I don't know what to do. Can you help me? Asterisk, and instantly, your body shifts. Your mind sharpens. Your chest expands with a quiet surge of purpose. This is not just empathy. It is activation. You are needed. And in that need, you feel real, valuable, Necessary. You rearrange your day. Cancel your plans. Offer your time, your energy, your emotional labor, without hesitation. You listen for hours, craft solutions, soothe fears, carry the weight of their crisis as if it were your own. And in the aftermath, when they say, "I don't know what I'd do without you," a warmth spreads through you, not pride, exactly, but something deeper, confirmation. I matter, but then, slowly, they begin to heal. They gain clarity. They grow stronger. They no longer call in the middle of the night. They solve problems on their own. And as their independence grows, you feel lighter, perhaps, but also strangely hollow. A quiet emptiness settles in. You miss the calls. You miss the intensity. You miss being required. This is the red flag, tying your sense of worth to being indispensable. Not because you don't care, but because your identity has become fused with another's dependence. This pattern rarely begins in adulthood. It takes root in childhood, in families where love was not freely given, but earned through service. You may have been the helper, the one who comforted your grieving parent. The peacemaker, the one who diffused arguments between siblings or parents. The parentified child, the one who managed emotions, schedules, even finances, while your own needs were overlooked. In such roles, you learned early that your value was not in being, but in doing. Not in existing, but in fixing. Affection came not for your laughter or your presence, but for your usefulness. When you brought a tissue to a crying mother, you were praised. When you stayed quiet during a fight, you were called good. When you took care of your younger sibling, you were seen. But when you were simply a child, needy, playful, uncertain, you were ignored, dismissed, or burdened with guilt. Over time, the message sank in, *I am loved when I am needed. I am invisible when I am not, *, and so, you began to equate love with utility. To feel necessary became the only proof that you belonged. As an adult, this conditioning doesn't vanish. It evolves. You may find yourself drawn to people in crisis, partners with emotional instability, friends in perpetual turmoil, coworkers overwhelmed by stress. Not because you enjoy chaos, but because it gives you a role, the rescuer, the fixer, the one who holds everything together. You overgive, not out of boundless generosity, but out of a quiet, unspoken fear. If I'm not needed, will I still be loved? You may even unconsciously engineer dependency, offering unsolicited advice, solving problems before they're asked, staying in relationships long after they've become one-sided, because the alternative feels like disappearance. When someone becomes self-sufficient, when they no longer rely on you, you may feel not relief, but grief. A sense of loss. As if, without the role of caretaker, you have no place. The tragedy of this red flag is twofold. First, it distorts love into a transaction. You don't stay because you enjoy the connection. You stay because you are useful. And when that usefulness fades, the relationship loses its meaning. Second, it prevents true intimacy. Because in a dynamic where one person is always helping and the other is always needing, there is no balance. No reciprocity. No space for mutual vulnerability. You are not seen for who you are valued for what you do. And so, you remain unknown, even as you are deeply involved. You give endlessly, but you are never truly received. Even more insidious is the way this need can sabotage others' growth. You may subtly discourage independence, not through malice, but through habit. You might minimize their progress. Are you sure you're ready to handle that alone, or reinsert yourself into their life after they've healed? I just want to check in, make sure you're really okay, or withdraw affection when they no longer seek your help. creating emotional distance that mirrors your inner emptiness. These are not conscious manipulations. They are survival reflexes. Because a healthy, independent person disrupts the script. They challenge the belief that love requires suffering, that closeness requires crisis, that you must be essential to be worthy. The deeper fear beneath this red flag is not of being unloved. It is of being ordinary, of existing without a purpose, of being just there, without a role to play, a problem to solve, a fire to extinguish. In a world that glorifies busyness, productivity, and impact, the idea of simply being can feel like failure. And so, you keep moving, keep giving, keep fixing, because stillness feels like erasure. But healing begins in the quiet realization, I do not have to be needed to be loved. I do not have to be useful to be worthy. It begins in the courage to sit in the emptiness that arises when no one needs you, and to stay. To learn that your value is not earned through service, but inherent. That you are not a tool, but a person. That love is not a reward for utility, but a presence that exists whether you are fixing, resting, or simply breathing. And as we rest in that quiet space, where no one calls, no one needs, no one depends, we may finally meet the self that has been waiting all along. Not as a savior, not as a solution, but as a being who is enough, simply because they are. Let us now turn gently inward, to the grief that has been waiting in the shadows, the red flag of inability to grieve. There is a moment, quiet and unremarkable, when something ends. A relationship dissolves, not with drama, but with slow distance. A loved one passes, and the world keeps turning. A dream you've carried for years quietly slips from your grasp, not with a crash, but with a sigh. And you wait. You brace for the wave of sorrow, the ache in the chest, the tears that should come. But they don't. You feel nothing. Or worse, you feel guilt for not feeling enough. You tell yourself you should be devastated, that you must be broken, that real people cry, mourn, collapse. But you don't. You go to work. You smile. You make dinner. You function. Perfectly. And yet, somewhere beneath the surface, there is a hollowness so deep it has no shape. This is the red flag, the inability to grieve. Not because you don't care. Not because you're strong. But because your heart has learned to seal itself shut, not as defiance, but as survival. Grief is not a luxury. It is a biological and emotional necessity. It is the body's way of releasing attachment, of honoring what was, of making space for what will be. But grief cannot exist without safety. If you grew up in a world where sadness was met with dismissal, stop crying, it's not that bad or punishment, if you don't quiet down, I'll give you something to cry about or silence, where no one spoke of loss, where death was whispered about, where divorce was never discussed, then you learned early that sorrow is dangerous. That to feel deeply is to be vulnerable. That to mourn is to be a burden. And so, your nervous system adapted. When loss came, instead of allowing the natural flood of emotion, it chose containment. It chose numbness over collapse. It chose silence over shame. Over time, this became automatic. You didn't decide to stop feeling. You simply stopped feeling as a way to keep going. The mind, unable to process the pain in real time, buried it. And the body, ever loyal, held the weight. This is not emotional coldness. It is emotional constipation, grief stored, not processed. You may function flawlessly, excel at work, maintain relationships, even appear joyful, while carrying unlamented losses like stones in your pockets. The childhood pet you weren't allowed to mourn. The parent who left and was never spoken of again. The dream of becoming an artist that was called impractical and quietly abandoned. The friendship that ended in betrayal but was never acknowledged. These are not small things. They are fractures in the soul. But because they were never witnessed, never named, never held in compassionate attention, they were never released. They remain suspended in time, frozen in the moment they occurred, waiting for permission to be felt. The mind-bending truth is that unprocessed grief does not disappear. It transmutes. It leaks out sideways, disguised as other things. You may not cry over the end of a relationship, but you develop a constant low-grade anxiety, a feeling that something is always about to go wrong. You may not mourn a lost opportunity, but you grow irritable, snapping at small inconveniences, as if the world has wronged you in a way you can't name. You may not feel sadness over a death, but you carry a fatigue that sleep doesn't touch, a weariness that has no physical cause. Or worse, when a new loss occurs, minor, even, you collapse under its weight, not because of what's happening now, but because it has become the vessel for every grief you've ever swallowed. The breaking point is not the last straw. It is the first time the dam cracks. This red flag is especially cruel because it masquerades as resilience. You may be praised for your strength, your composure, your ability to handle things. But strength is not the absence of pain. It is the courage to face it. And what you've been doing is not enduring, it is evading. Not healing, but hiding. The tragedy is not that you don't grieve. It is that you believe you shouldn't have to. That grief is a sign of weakness. That moving on means never looking back. That healing means forgetting. But real healing does not erase loss. It integrates it. It allows you to say, this mattered. This hurt. This changed me, without that acknowledgement, the past remains unprocessed, and the present becomes haunted. Healing does not begin with forcing tears. That would be just another demand on a heart already overburdened. It begins with permission. With the quiet, radical act of saying, it's okay to miss what's gone. It begins in small moments, sitting with a photo, not to analyze, but to feel. Saying the name of someone who died, not to stir pain, but to honor presence. Writing a letter to a dream you had to let go of, not to resurrect it, but to thank it for its time. It means allowing yourself to feel the absence, even if it arrives not as sorrow, but as a strange emptiness, a quiet ache, a breath that doesn't go all the way down. And as we begin to soften around what we've lost, another distortion arises, one that reshapes memory itself. If grief is buried, what happens to the past? Does it remain as it was? Or does the mind, in its longing for comfort, begin to rewrite it? Let us now drift into the quiet temptation of idealizing the past. There's a sigh that escapes in quiet moments, almost without thought. Things were simpler back then. The words drift into the air like smoke, carrying with them a soft glow, a mental image of summer evenings on a porch swing, of music from an old radio, of a first love under a street lamp, of holidays where everyone was still alive and the world felt smaller, safer. It feels like truth. It feels like comfort. But pause for a moment. Close your eyes. Go deeper. Was it really simpler? Or has time, with its gentle hand, smoothed over the cracks, erased the yelling, softened the loneliness, forgotten the fear? This is the red flag, idealizing the past not as honest remembrance, but as emotional escape, a subconscious rewriting of history where pain is minimized, joy is amplified, and the familiar, however flawed, is crowned as better than now. Not because it was good, but because it was known. Nostalgia is not a neutral memory. It is a psychological filter, a kind of cognitive alchemy that transforms pain into poetry. The brain, especially under stress, reaches for the past not for accuracy, but for solace. It recalls the warmth of the kitchen light at dusk, but forgets the silence that followed your father's anger. It remembers the thrill of your first kiss, but not the months of anxiety and rejection that surrounded it. It holds onto the image of your childhood home, bathed in golden light, while erasing the nights you lay awake, listening to muffled arguments through the wall. This selective memory is not deception. It is protection. When the present feels unstable, overwhelming, or uncertain, the mind retreats to what it knows, even if what it knows was never truly safe. Familiarity, no matter how painful, feels more bearable than the unknown. And so, the past becomes a sanctuary, not because it was peaceful, but because it was predictable. This red flag often emerges during times of transition, after a breakup, a career change, a loss, or even a moment of unexpected peace. When the future looms with its open-ended questions, when the present demands presence you're not sure you can give, the mind whispers, *, go back. It was better before, *, but before is a myth. It is a collage of sensory fragments, smells, sounds, images, stitched together into a narrative of purity and ease. You remember the ice cream on hot days, but not the bullying at school. You remember the closeness of family gatherings, but not the conditional love, the unspoken rules, the emotional labor you performed as a child to keep the peace. You remember the innocence of youth, but not the confusion, the powerlessness, the fear of not being enough. The past, in this light, becomes a fantasy, a version of reality where pain is background noise and joy is the main event. The danger of this idealization is subtle but profound. It doesn't just distort memory. It distorts desire. You may begin to resist growth, clinging to old patterns, old relationships, old versions of yourself, not because they serve you, but because they feel like home. You might return to an ex-partner who hurt you, believing the love was more real back then. You might stay in a stagnant job because it reminds you of a time when life felt easier. You might reject new connections, new opportunities, new ways of being, because they lack the emotional texture of what you remember. In doing so, you are not honoring the past. You are using it as a shield against the vulnerability of the present. You would rather suffer in a story you know than risk healing in one you don't. In the deeper tragedy, you may come to believe that happiness is always behind you. That joy was possible only in childhood, in a relationship that ended, in a version of life that can never return. This creates a quiet resignation, a belief that the best of your life has already passed. And when that happens, the future is not a possibility. It is a decline. You stop dreaming. You stop hoping. You stop trusting that good things can still happen. You may even sabotage present joy, unconsciously, because it doesn't match the emotional tone of your idealized past. Peace feels flat. Love feels too easy. Success feels unearned. Because in your mind, real life was hard, and therefore, real happiness must be painful. But healing is not about returning. It is about seeing clearly. It is about looking at the past with gentle honesty, acknowledging not only the beauty, but the wounds. Not to diminish the good, but to release the illusion. The truth is, the past was not simpler. It was just younger. And youth is not wisdom. It is limitation. It is dependence. It is a lack of choices. There was a kind of purity in not knowing, but there was also a kind of prison in not having agency. To long for that time is to long for a self that could not yet speak its truth, set its boundaries, or choose its path. Letting go of the idealized past does not mean rejecting it. It means integrating it. It means saying, asterisk, yes, there was beauty. And yes, there was pain. And I carry both, asterisk. It means understanding that the warmth you remember was real, but so was the cold. That the love you felt was real, but so was the fear. And that you do not need to go back to feel safe. You can build safety now. Not in memory, but in presence. Not in what was, but in what is. And as we release the grip on what's gone, another fear arises, one that trembles at the edge of possibility. If the past is no longer a refuge, and the present is no longer an escape, what happens when you begin to succeed? What if, as you rise, a quiet terror whispers, "You don't belong here"? Let us now drift into the red flag of fearing your own success. You've been working toward this moment for years. The manuscript is nearly finished, every chapter revised, every sentence shaped with care. The final pages are within reach. Or perhaps it's the job interview you aced, the one that could change everything. The offer is coming. Or maybe it's the relationship, finally stable, tender, real, after years of chaos. For the first time, you let yourself imagine a future that doesn't end in pain. And then, just as the goal comes into focus, something shifts. You stop writing. You cancel a meeting. You pick a fight over nothing. You fall mysteriously ill. Or you simply disappear. Not dramatically. Not with explanation. Just a slow, quiet retreat from the very thing you said you wanted. This is the red flag, fear of success. Not a lack of desire. Not a failure of discipline. But a deep, unconscious resistance to winning, because success, when it finally arrives, doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like danger. Success, for many, is not a reward. It is a threat. It brings visibility, light where you've spent a lifetime in shadow. It demands that you step forward, speak up, take space. And if you grew up in an environment where standing out was punished, where ambition was called arrogance, where excellence was met with jealousy or dismissal, then your nervous system learned long ago that safety lies in staying small. Think of the child who earned praise for good grades, only to hear, "Don't get too full of yourself," or the one whose talent made their sibling resentful, their parent uncomfortable. Or the one who was told, "Who do you think you are?" The message, spoken or unspoken, was clear, asterisk. To be seen is to be targeted. To succeed is to disrupt the balance. To shine is to risk love, asterisk. Over time, the subconscious internalizes a survival strategy, asterisk. Stay beneath the surface. Keep the peace. Don't rise too high, asterisk. And so, when success begins to loom, when the promotion nears, when the book nears completion, when love becomes secure, the mind, trained to protect you from emotional fallout, activates a silent alarm, asterisk. This is too much. You don't belong here, asterisk. This is not imposter syndrome in the way we often describe it, not just the doubt, but the deeper terror beneath it. It's not merely thinking I don't deserve this, it's fearing, asterisk. If I accept this, I will be exposed. I will be found out. I will have to keep proving myself forever, asterisk. Success doesn't feel like a rival. It feels like entering a stage where everyone is watching, waiting for you to fail. And so, to avoid the unbearable pressure of performance, the psyche sabotages the win before it happens. You procrastinate not because you're lazy, but because delay is safer than visibility. You pick a fight not because you want to destroy the relationship, but because instability is familiar, and peace feels like a trap. You follow not because of germs, but because the body, always wiser than the mind, enacts what the subconscious cannot say, asterisk. We are not ready. Make it stop, asterisk. The mind-bending truth? You may be more afraid of success than failure. Because failure, however painful, is predictable. It confirms the old story, asterisk. I'm not good enough. I knew this would happen, asterisk. It fits the narrative you've lived by for years. But success disrupts everything. It forces you to question the beliefs that have shaped your life. Asterisk, what if I am capable? What if I do belong? What if I'm not as broken as I thought? Asterisk, these are not comforting thoughts. They are terrifying. Because to accept success is to accept change. And change, even when it's good, is loss. The loss of the self that struggled, the identity built on overcoming, the comfort of suffering. To be successful is to become someone new. And the mind, loyal to the past, resists. This red flag is especially insidious because it masquerades as practicality. You tell yourself you're being cautious, realistic, that you need more time, more preparation, more proof. But the goalposts keep moving. The closer you get, the more obstacles appear. You may even reject the success when it arrives, turning down the promotion, shelving the book, withdrawing from the healthy relationship, because the reality of it feels unreal, unearned, unsafe. You may not even recognize it as success. You may call it luck, timing, or the kindness of others, anything to deflect the truth. Asterisk, I did this. I am here. I am capable. Asterisk. And beneath it all is a quiet, aching fear. If I succeed, will I still be loved? Will the people who only knew you in struggle still recognize you in peace? Will you lose the empathy, the connection, the identity of the underdog? Will you become someone who no longer needs rescuing, and in that, become unnecessary? The deeper you go, the more you realize, this isn't about achievement. It's about belonging. It's about whether you believe you are allowed to take up space without apology. Healing begins not in pushing harder, but in softening. In asking, gently, asterisk, what was dangerous about being seen? Who taught me that success was unsafe? Asterisk, it means learning to tolerate the discomfort of visibility. To sit with the fear of not belonging, without fleeing into self-sabotage. It means practicing the radical act of receiving success, not with guilt, not with deflection, but with quiet acceptance. Saying, asterisk, I am here. I did this. And I don't have to earn the right to stay, asterisk. And as we learn to hold space for our own rise, another layer of the mind stirs, one that reveals how fragile our emotional balance can be. If success feels dangerous, what happens when your feelings shift without warning? When calm becomes rage, joy becomes despair, not because of what's happening, but because of what's buried. Let us now drift into the quiet storm of emotional inconsistency. You're sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea, the evening quiet and soft. The world feels still. You feel calm, maybe even content. And then, without warning, something shifts. A text arrives, neutral, even kind, and suddenly, a wave of rage surges through you so intensely it takes your breath away. Your hands clench. Your jaw tightens. You want to scream, throw something, vanish. Moments later, the anger collapses into despair. Tears come. Not because of what was said, but because you don't understand why you're reacting this way. You apologize, confused, ashamed. Or perhaps it's the opposite. You're laughing with friends, fully present, when without cause, a deep sadness descends, like a fog rolling in from nowhere. You smile through it, but inside, you feel hollow, distant, as if you've been replaced by a stranger wearing your face. This isn't moodiness. It isn't drama. It's a red flag, emotional inconsistency, where your inner world shifts violently, unpredictably, not in response to the present, but to something buried, unprocessed, and long forgotten. This pattern does not arise from instability. It arises from overwhelm. When emotions have been suppressed, ignored, or punished for years, especially in childhood, the nervous system never learns how to regulate. You weren't taught to name your feelings, to sit with discomfort, to move through sorrow without collapsing or rage without exploding. Instead, you learned to survive, to shut down when things got too intense, or to erupt when the pressure became unbearable. Over time, these survival mechanisms become default settings. The nervous system, trained to operate in extremes, has no middle ground. It knows only fight or flight, freeze or flood. There is no gentle slope between emotions, only cliffs. And so, you live on the edge of these shifts, never quite knowing which version of you will appear next. Emotional inconsistency is often rooted in unresolved trauma, insecure attachment, or chronic emotional invalidation. If you grew up in a home where feelings were dismissed, you're too sensitive, stop crying, it's not a big deal, why are you so dramatic, you learned early that your inner world was not safe to express. If your caregivers were unpredictable, alternating between warmth and withdrawal, affection and anger, you adapted by becoming hypervigilant, constantly scanning for danger, bracing for the next emotional storm. In such environments, the self doesn't develop a stable emotional rhythm. It becomes reactive, sensitive to subtle cues, prone to sudden shifts not because of what's happening now, but because of what used to happen. A raised voice, even in jest, may trigger the memory of a parent's rage. A moment of silence may echo the loneliness of being ignored. The present becomes a minefield of unconscious triggers, and your emotions respond not to the moment, but to the past. The deeper issue is not the emotions themselves, but the loss of self-trust. When you can't predict your own reactions, when you go from calm to fury in seconds, or from joy to numbness without cause, you begin to fear your own mind. You start to wonder, am I broken? Unstable? Unlovable, you may apologize excessively, not because you did anything wrong, but because you feel responsible for feelings you didn't choose. Others may label you dramatic or intense, not out of malice, but because they cannot see the invisible currents pulling you under. But the truth is, you are not too much. You are overwhelmed. You are carrying unprocessed grief, unacknowledged fear, unspoken anger, stored in the body, waiting for release. And when it comes, it doesn't arrive as a gentle ripple. It arrives as a tidal wave. This red flag also reveals a lack of emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish between subtle shades of feeling. If you've spent a lifetime suppressing or mislabeling emotions, you may not have the vocabulary to name what you're experiencing. Instead of recognizing that you feel frustrated, disappointed, or overwhelmed, you only register the extremes. I'm fine or I'm falling apart. You don't feel sadness, you feel collapse. You don't feel irritation, you feel rage. The middle ground has been erased, leaving only black and white. And without nuance, regulation becomes impossible. You can't soothe what you can't name. You can't navigate what you can't recognize. The implications are profound. You may begin to avoid relationships, not because you dislike people, but because intimacy increases the risk of emotional flooding. You may isolate yourself, fearing you'll snap or break down at the wrong moment. You might turn to numbing strategies, scrolling, overworking, substance use, not to escape pleasure, but to escape the unpredictability of your own inner world. And in the aftermath of each shift, you may feel not relief, but shame. Why can't I be normal? Why can't I just stay calm? But this is not a flaw. It is a system in survival mode, responding not to who you are now, but to who you had to be then. Healing does not begin with controlling your emotions. That would be asking a storm to stop before it has passed. It begins with compassion. With learning to say, this isn't me falling apart. This is me feeling what I couldn't feel before. It means developing tools, not to suppress, but to witness. To pause in the moment of shift and ask, gently, what just happened? What did I feel before this wave came? It means building emotional vocabulary, learning to name the subtle shades between numbness and rage, between calm and despair. It means understanding that integration, not suppression, is the path to stability. And as we learn to hold space for our shifting emotions, another silence emerges, one even more unsettling. Not the chaos of feeling too much, but the absence of feeling at all. What happens when the storms pass, and in their wake, there is nothing? No joy. No spark. just stillness so deep it feels like absence. Let us now drift into the quiet void of the absence of joy. You wake up. The sun filters through the blinds. You have what so many would call a good life, a stable job, a loving partner, a home that's safe, routines that work. You've achieved the things you once dreamed of, the career, the relationship, the independence. And yet, as you lie there, the morning light on your skin, there is no warmth in your chest. No quiet hum of contentment. No spark of anticipation. Just a stillness so complete it feels like absence. You go through the motions. You shower, dress, make coffee, smile at the neighbor, reply to messages, all with competence, even grace. To the outside world, you are thriving. But inside, there is nothing. Not sadness. Not anger. Just a hollow where joy should be. This is the red flag. Not despair, not crisis, but the quiet, insidious absence of joy, an emptiness so subtle it can go unnoticed for years. It is not that you are broken. It is that you have forgotten how to feel alive. Joy is not the opposite of sadness. It is not merely the absence of pain. It is a neurological and emotional state, born from a complex interplay of dopamine, safety, and presence. It requires a nervous system that believes the world is not only survivable, but good. It requires a mind that is not braced for the next threat, a heart that is not guarding against the next loss. But when you've lived through chronic stress, unresolved trauma, or years of emotional suppression, when your formative years taught you that peace is temporary and pleasure is dangerous, your brain begins to downregulate its reward system. Joy becomes a risk. Excitement feels like a prelude to disappointment. Pleasure feels like a distraction from vigilance. And so, over time, the circuits that once lit up in response to beauty, connection, or simple delight begin to dim. You may still recognize joy in others, their laughter, their enthusiasm, their wide-eyed wonder, but it feels foreign, like watching a language you once knew but can no longer speak. This red flag is especially treacherous because it masquerades as stability. You tell yourself you're fine. You point to your achievements, your responsibilities, your functionality. You're not depressed, no tears, no paralyzing fatigue, no thoughts of ending it all. You're just empty. And because you can still perform, still care for others, still meet expectations, no one questions it. Not even you. You may even pride yourself on your resilience, your ability to keep it together. But the soul knows the difference between survival and aliveness. Between going through the motions and being present. Between existing and feeling. And in the quiet moments, when the house is still, when the phone is down, when no one is watching, you may feel it, a quiet grief for something you can't name. Not for what's missing, but for what's gone, the lightness, the spontaneity, the unself-conscious laughter that once lived in your chest. The tragedy of this absence is not that joy vanished overnight. It is that it faded so slowly you didn't notice. Like a flame reduced to embers, it dwindled in silence. Perhaps it began in childhood, where excitement was met with dismissal, calm down, you're too loud, or where pleasure was punished, don't get too comfortable, things can change, perhaps it was worn down by years of caretaking, where your needs were secondary. Or by chronic stress, where the body stayed in survival mode so long it forgot how to rest, how to play, how to simply be. You adapted. You learned to function without joy, because joy felt unsafe, frivolous, or undeserved. And in doing so, you became a ghost in your own life, present in body, but absent in spirit. You moved through the world like someone sleepwalking, performing the roles of lover, worker, friend, child, but never fully inhabiting them. And because joy is missing, you may not even miss it. You don't crave it, because you've forgotten what it feels like. You may mistake distraction for delight, scrolling, working, consuming, because motion feels like life, even when it's not. You may romanticize pain, believing that only suffering proves you're feeling deeply. Or you may cling to crisis, because at least in chaos, you can feel something. But peace? Calm? Simple pleasure? These feel suspicious. Boring. Like you're not trying hard enough. Like you're betraying the part of you that has always been on guard. The deeper implication of this red flag is identity erosion. If joy is a signal of aliveness, then its absence whispers, you are not here, not because you're failing, but because you've been living so long in survival that you no longer recognize your own presence. You may look in the mirror and see a person who has everything, but feel like no one is home. And the cruelest irony? The very things that should bring joy, love, success, safety, feel hollow, because they were never meant to be reached in this state. They were meant to be felt. But you've been numbed for so long that even fulfillment feels like a performance. Healing does not begin with chasing happiness. That would be asking a dried-up riverbed to suddenly flow. It begins with gentle reawakening, with allowing yourself to notice small sensations, the warmth of sunlight, the taste of ripe fruit, the sound of rain, without demanding that they make you joyful. With asking, softly, when was the last time I felt truly light? Who was I then? It means creating safety not just in the world, but in the body. Learning to rest without guilt. To pause without purpose. To exist without earning it. And as we begin to listen for the faint echo of joy, another distortion arises, one that reshapes how we see pain itself. If feeling nothing feels wrong, what if we begin to believe that suffering is the only truth? That love must hurt to be real? Let us now drift into the quiet, dangerous habit of normalizing toxicity. There is a couple at a cafe. He leans in, voice low but sharp, saying, "I just don't like you talking to him. It makes me uncomfortable." She smiles, nods, says, "I know, I'm sorry. I'll stop." He relaxes, satisfied. She sips her tea, but her eyes flicker with something, unease, perhaps, or resignation. Later, she tells a friend, "He's just passionate. He loves me so much, he can't help it." Another story, a woman describes her mother's constant criticism, her weight, her choices, her friendships, and says, "She's just protective. She wants the best for me." A man recounts how his partner tracks his location, questions his plans, and gets angry when he doesn't reply within minutes. "She's intense," he says, "but that's how I know she cares." These are not isolated phrases. They are patterns. Translations. A quiet, unconscious rewriting of harm into love. This is the red flag, normalizing toxicity, where jealousy becomes devotion, control becomes care, manipulation becomes concern, and emotional volatility becomes depth. Not because it's true, but because the mind, when raised in chaos, learns to call pain normal. This cognitive distortion does not arise from ignorance. It arises from adaptation. If your earliest experiences of love were entangled with unpredictability, if affection arrived with conditions, if closeness came with criticism, if attention was earned through suffering, then your nervous system begins to associate love with intensity, not safety. The child who only received attention during emotional storms learns that love is loud, dramatic, unstable. The one whose caregiver swung between warmth and withdrawal learns that connection is not steady, but earned through performance. Over time, the brain wires itself to expect chaos as intimacy. Calm feels alien. Peace feels like disconnection. And so, when someone treats you gently, consistently, without drama, it doesn't feel like love. It feels like indifference. Because in your emotional template, love is not quiet. It is fire. It is friction. It is the push and pull, the high highs and the low lows. And in that framework, abuse isn't a violation. It's a sign that you matter. Gaslighting becomes misunderstanding. When someone denies your reality, you're too sensitive, that never happened, you're imagining things, you don't see it as manipulation. You see it as a miscommunication, a rough patch. You begin to doubt your own memory, your own perception, because the alternative, that someone you love would deliberately distort the truth, is too destabilizing to accept. Control becomes protection. When a partner demands access to your phone, dictates you can see, or isolates you from friends, it's not seen as domination. It's reframed as devotion, * they just care too much. They're worried about me, * jealousy becomes proof of love. The more possessive they are, the more you believe they must really love you. And emotional volatility, sudden anger, silent treatments, explosive arguments, becomes passion. Because in a world where love was never safe, intensity feels like the only evidence it's real. The mind-bending truth of this red flag is this: you may reject healthy relationships not because they're bad, but because they feel wrong. When someone treats you with consistent kindness, when they respect your boundaries, when they love you without drama or demand, you may feel restless, bored, suspicious. You may unconsciously provoke conflict, test their loyalty, or withdraw, because peace doesn't match your emotional language. You've been speaking the dialect of chaos for so long that fluency and calm feels like emptiness. You may even sabotage a stable relationship, not out of malice, but out of a deep, unspoken belief: if it doesn't hurt, it's not love. And so, you return to what's familiar, not because it's good, but because it's known. This is not weakness. It is trauma's logic. A survival strategy refined over years. If you grew up in an environment where emotional volatility was the norm, where love and pain were intertwined, then to believe it's harmful would mean confronting a devastating truth: that the people who were supposed to protect you may have harmed you. And that realization is unbearable. So the mind protects itself by redefining the harm. It says, * this isn't abuse. This is just how love is. This is passion. This is how people show they care, * in doing so, it preserves the illusion of safety. It allows you to stay in the relationship, to keep the connection, to avoid the grief of acknowledging that love can be both given and weaponized. The implications are profound. You may spend years in relationships that drain you, confuse you, exhaust you, while insisting they are deep, meaningful, real. You may dismiss friends who express concern, not because you don't trust them, but because their perspective threatens your reality. You may even envy couples who fight constantly, mistaking turbulence for connection. And in the process, you lose touch with your own needs. You forget what safety feels like. You forget that love should not leave you anxious, diminished, or afraid. You forget that you are allowed to be treated with gentleness, without having to earn it through suffering. Healing begins not in blaming yourself, but in questioning the narrative. In asking, softly, * what if love shouldn't hurt? What if peace isn't boring, but free? What if the quiet, steady presence of someone who respects you is not indifference, but the deepest form of care? * it means learning to recognize the difference between intensity and intimacy, between control and protection, between passion and harm. It means allowing yourself to grieve the love that was conditional, inconsistent, or painful, not because you hate it, but because you deserve more. And as we begin to untangle the stories we've been told, as we question the lies we've mistaken for truth, a final silence emerges, one that is not resistance, not anger, not pain, but something far quieter. Not a fight, but a release. Let us now drift into the last red flag, the quiet surrender, the soul's soft whisper that it has stopped believing in a different life. You wake up. You move through your morning like a well-practiced ritual: shower, dress, coffee, commute. You smile at the barista. You reply to messages. You attend meetings, nod at the right moments, offer thoughtful input. To the outside world, you are functioning. Calm. Composed. Maybe even content. You're not depressed. Not anxious. You don't feel broken. You're fine. And yet, somewhere beneath the surface, something has gone still. Not with a crash, not with a cry, but with a silence so complete it feels like a door closing from the inside. You no longer dream, not of love, not of change, not of a different life. Hope feels like a childish indulgence, something you've outgrown, like believing in magic or happy endings. You've stopped asking what if, and accepted this is the red flag, the quiet surrender, not to despair, but to resignation. Not a collapse, but a slow, internal disengagement. The soul's silent whisper, I give up, and the most haunting part. You may not even realize it's happening. This surrender does not announce itself. It doesn't come with tears or dramatic breakdowns. It arrives in increments, over years. It is the culmination of 1,000 small betrayals, the times you ignored your gut, swallowed your truth, stayed in what drained you, gave when you had nothing left. It is the weight of unmet needs, unspoken grief, and emotional labor performed without return. It is the exhaustion of trying to be seen in a world that kept looking away. And after so long, the psyche, weary beyond words, stops fighting. It doesn't rage. It doesn't flee. It simply stops. Not because it wants to, but because it can't sustain the effort anymore. The mind, once full of questions and longings, now murmurs, this is all there is. This is how life is. This is who I am, it is not depression, though it shares its stillness. It is not apathy, though it wears its face. It is something deeper, learned helplessness internalized, where the belief that nothing can change becomes not a thought, but a state of being. You may not feel sad. You may not feel angry. You may not feel much at all. That is the danger. The most insidious red flags are not the ones that scream, but the ones that whisper. This surrender masquerades as peace. You tell yourself you've made peace with your life, with your choices, with your loneliness. But peace is not emptiness. Peace is full. It is presence. It is the quiet joy of being here, now, without resistance. What you're experiencing is not peace. It is numbness. It is the absence of expectation. It is the quiet death of possibility. You no longer imagine a different future because imagining feels like pain. You no longer long for deeper connection because longing feels like vulnerability. You no longer believe in change because belief feels like setting yourself up for disappointment. And so, you settle. Not with grace, but with quiet defeat. The tragedy of this red flag is not that you stopped trying. It is that you stopped wanting. You may have a stable job, a kind partner, a comfortable life, everything you thought you wanted, and yet, you feel like a visitor in your own existence. You go through the motions, but you are not present. You smile, but you do not feel joy. You love, but you do not feel held. You live, but you do not feel alive. And the worst part? You may not even miss it. You've been surviving for so long that survival has become the only reality you know. You mistake endurance for strength. You call resignation wisdom. You wear your numbness like armor, not realizing it has sealed you off from everything that could heal you. This surrender is not weakness. It is the final act of a soul that has fought for too long. It is the quiet aftermath of years spent bending, breaking, and rebuilding only to break again. It is the mind's way of protecting you from further disappointment, not by shielding you from pain, but by removing the hope that made pain possible. And in that removal, something essential is lost, the spark that says, it could be different. I could be different. I could be more, But here, in this stillness, something else is possible. Because the very fact that you are listening to these words, that you have stayed through 24 red flags, through layers of pain, through the unraveling of self, means that somewhere, beneath the silence, the spark is not gone. It is only buried. You noticed. You felt the flicker of recognition. You allowed yourself to wonder, is this really all there is? And in that question, no matter how faint, there is a beginning. Surrender does not have to be the end. It can be the threshold. The moment before the breath returns. The stillness before the tide shifts. You do not have to rebuild everything tonight. You do not have to find your dreams or reclaim your voice or leap into change. You only need to rest. To breathe. To let the weight of all you've carried settle, without judgment. To whisper, even if you don't believe it yet, I am still here, and that means you are not done. Take a breath. Let go. Rest. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are not too far gone. You are here. And that is where healing begins.